During the final fitting for her $15,000 wedding dress, my daughter looked at my stained work boots, pinched her nose, and whispered, "You are just a lowly garbage collector. Stand back and do not embarrass me in front of my new family." I did not argue. I did not yell. I just quietly put my unlimited heavy metal black card back into my pocket, handed the cashier a maxed-out secondary credit card, and walked out. When the decline receipt printed my daughter's perfect high society facade began to crumble. But that was only the beginning of the lesson I was about to teach them. My name is Leroy. I am 72 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know what city you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respect should never carry a price tag. The Vera Wang Bridal Boutique in downtown Chicago was the kind of place where even the air smelled expensive. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Thick white carpets absorbed the sound of footsteps, and women sipping champagne spoke in hushed, privileged tones. It was not a place designed for a man wearing a neon green and reflective orange sanitation jumpsuit. I had just finished my Tuesday morning route. I am the founder and CEO of Jenkins Environmental Solutions, a waste management and recycling empire that spans 3 states. But I never told my daughter the true extent of my wealth. To her, I was just a supervisor who occasionally drove a truck. I drove that route every Tuesday morning because it was the exact same route I drove 40 years ago when my late wife and I had nothing but a dream and a rented garbage truck. It kept me grounded. Maya hated it. She always hated the smell of diesel and the sight of my calloused hands. She spent her entire life trying to scrub her working-class background from her identity. And when she met Preston Vance, she thought she had finally found her golden ticket into high society. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the boutique, the bell chiming softly above me. Immediately, the atmosphere in the room shifted. A saleswoman in a pristine black dress froze her eyes, darting from my heavy work boots to my grease-stained jacket. But my eyes were focused on the center of the room. There stood Maya, spinning slowly in a mountain of white silk and French lace. She looked beautiful. For a brief second, I saw the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. Then I noticed the company she was keeping. Sitting on a velvet sofa directly across from her was Patricia Vance, Preston's mother. Patricia was a woman who wore her perceived superiority like a crown. When she saw me approaching, she visibly recoiled. She raised a manicured hand, pressing a silk handkerchief to her nose as if my mere presence was polluting her oxygen. Sitting next to her was Preston, my future son-in-law. He was 32, dressed in a tailored navy suit, checking a heavy silver watch on his wrist. He claimed to be a senior financial investment advisor, a title he threw around to belittle anyone who worked with their hands. When he saw me, a slow, mocking smirk spread across his face. Maya finally turned and saw me standing there. The smile vanished from her face instantly. The color drained from her cheeks, replaced quickly by a flush of absolute fury. She did not greet me. She did not say hello. She marched over to me, grabbing my arm and pulling me roughly toward a secluded corner near the dressing rooms. "Dad, what is wrong with you?" she hissed, her voice vibrating with suppressed rage. "Why are you dressed like this? You smell like a landfill." I looked at my daughter, keeping my voice perfectly calm. "I just finished my shift, Maya. You texted me an hour ago saying the boutique needed the final payment today, or they would not release the dress for alterations. I came straight here to pay the bill, just like you asked." Maya looked over her shoulder, her eyes darting nervously toward Preston and Patricia, who were whispering to each other and staring at us. She turned back to me, her eyes narrowing with a coldness that broke my heart. "I told you to transfer the money, not show up here looking like a vagrant," she snapped. "Preston's mother is already judging us. Do you know how hard I have worked to make them accept me? You are just a lowly garbage collector. Stand back, keep your mouth shut, and do not embarrass me in front of my new family." Those words hung in the air between us. "You are just a lowly garbage collector." She said it with such venom, such absolute disdain for the very man who had fed her, clothed her, and paid for the expensive college degree she now used to look down on me. I looked into her eyes and realized that the daughter I raised was gone. She had been replaced by a stranger obsessed with status and ashamed of the blood in her veins. I did not raise my voice. I simply nodded. "You are right, Maya. I am just a garbage collector. Let us go pay for the dress." I walked past her toward the elegant marble checkout counter. The saleswoman gave me a tight, uncomfortable smile. "Your total for the gown and the expedited alterations comes to $15,200, sir," she said softly. Preston stood up from the sofa, adjusting his suit jacket, and strolled over to the counter. He leaned against the marble, looking at me with total amusement. "That is a steep bill for a city worker," Leroy Preston said, his voice dripping with condescension. "If you need to set up a payment plan, I could probably give you some financial advice. Managing debt is my specialty after all." Patricia let out a soft, mocking laugh from the sofa. Maya buried her face in her hands, clearly mortified by my presence. I looked at Preston, then at my daughter. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. My fingers brushed against the heavy, solid titanium of my corporate black card, the card that had no limit, the card connected to an account holding millions of dollars in liquid assets. I felt the cold metal against my fingertips, and then I let it go. Instead, I reached into the back of my wallet and pulled out a basic standard issue credit card. It was an old backup card I kept for minor emergencies, one I knew for a fact had a strict limit of $2,000. I handed it to the cashier. The woman took it with both hands, typed the amount into the terminal, and inserted the chip. The machine hummed for a few seconds. The silence in the boutique was heavy. Maya held her breath. Preston smirked. Then the machine let out a sharp, angry beep. The cashier looked at the screen, her face flushing with embarrassment. She cleared her throat. "I am so sorry, sir. The card has been declined." Patricia gasped loudly from the sofa. "Oh my goodness." Preston let out a loud, theatrical sigh, shaking his head. "Wow. Declined. I guess collecting trash does not pay as well as Maya claimed." Maya looked like she was about to explode. She grabbed the counter, her knuckles turning white. "What do you mean, declined?" she shrieked, looking at me. "Dad, what is going on? You promised me this dress. You promised you had the money." I looked at her, my expression completely unreadable. "I guess a lowly garbage collector like me just cannot afford a $15,000 dress, Maya. It seems my pockets are empty." "But you promised," she screamed, no longer caring who was watching. "You are ruining my wedding. You are ruining my life. How am I supposed to pay for this?" I slowly turned my gaze to Preston. He was still standing there, though his smug smile had faltered slightly at the sight of Maya's meltdown. "Well, Preston," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade, "you are the highly successful financial investment advisor. You are the man of high society. A $15,000 dress should be absolute pocket change for a man of your status. Why do you not treat your beautiful bride?" Preston swallowed hard. His face suddenly lost its color. He patted his pockets awkwardly, avoiding my gaze. "Well, you see, Leroy, my liquidity is currently tied up in some high-yield offshore accounts. I do not carry that kind of liquid cash on a Tuesday." "Of course you do not," I said, allowing a brief cold smile to cross my face. I looked back at Maya, who was now weeping tears of sheer humiliation. "I hope your new family can figure it out, Maya. I have to get back to the landfill." I turned around and walked toward the glass doors. Maya yelled after me, calling me a failure, a terrible father, telling me that if I walked out that door, she would never speak to me again. I did not stop. I did not look back. I pushed the doors open and stepped out into the crisp Chicago air. I walked down the block to where I had parked my massive 12-ton garbage truck. I climbed up the metal steps into the cabin and slammed the heavy door shut. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My chest ached, a deep, hollow pain that only a parent betrayed by their own child can understand. But the pain quickly gave way to a cold, calculated clarity. I took off my heavy work gloves. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled through my contacts until I found the direct line to David, my private wealth manager at the executive bank. He answered on the second ring. "Good morning, Mr. Jenkins," David said respectfully. "How can I assist you today?" "David," I said, my voice steady and completely void of emotion. "I need you to access the private family trust, the one designated for Maya's wedding expenses." "Yes, sir. I have it pulled up right here." "Freeze it," I commanded. "Freeze the entire account. Cancel the checks for the caterer. Cancel the deposit for the country club. Block the wire transfer for the florist. I want every single transaction related to Preston Vance and Maya Jenkins halted immediately. From this exact second forward, not a single dime of my money is to be spent on that wedding." There was a brief pause on the line. "Understood, Mr. Jenkins. Placing a hard freeze on all associated funds right now." I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. I started the roaring engine of the garbage truck. My daughter wanted to play the high society game. She wanted to look down on the man who built her life from nothing. It was time to let her see what happens when the garbage collector stops paying the bills. 2 days passed. I had not heard a single word from Maya since I walked out of that bridal boutique. There were no apologies. There were no angry text messages. There was just complete dead silence. She was probably expecting me to come crawling back begging for forgiveness, offering up a cashier's check to make it all go away. That was how it usually worked. For 28 years, I gave that girl everything she ever pointed a finger at. I worked the trucks, built my company from the dirt up, and poured every ounce of my success into making sure she never had to struggle the way her mother and I did. But I realized too late that I had not raised a strong, independent woman. I had raised a spoiled, entitled stranger who was ashamed of her own blood. It was Thursday morning. The Chicago air was thick with the smell of diesel and damp concrete. I was at the main operations yard of Jenkins Environmental Solutions. I was wearing my usual grease-stained coveralls, holding an old rag wiping down the chrome grille of a massive Mack truck. I did not have to do this. I had a maintenance crew of 50 men who handled the fleet. But I liked the work. It kept my hands rough and my mind sharp. I was wiping a stubborn oil stain when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I did not look up right away. I just kept wiping. But the sound of the engine was entirely out of place. It was not the heavy industrial rumble of a garbage truck. It was the smooth, quiet purr of a European luxury vehicle. I turned my head slowly. A silver BMW sedan was navigating the muddy, pothole-filled entrance of the sanitation yard. It looked ridiculous there, like a fragile glass ornament rolling through a rock quarry. The car jerked to a stop about 10 feet away from me. The door swung open and out stepped Preston Vance. He was wearing a light gray designer suit, stepping carefully to avoid getting his Italian leather shoes dirty in the mud. He looked around the yard with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. He pinched his nose, waving his hand in front of his face to clear the smell of exhaust and scrap metal. He had absolutely no idea where he was. He thought he was walking into a city-owned dump to yell at a lowly municipal worker. He did not know that the entire 12 acres of prime commercial real estate he was standing on belonged to me. He did not know that the dozens of trucks lined up in rows behind me were bought and paid for in cash by the man he was about to insult. Leroy Preston shouted over the hum of a nearby generator. He did not call me Mr. Jenkins. He did not show an ounce of respect. He marched over to where I was standing, his face red with anger. I slowly wiped my hands on my rag, folded it, and tucked it into my back pocket. I looked at him completely unbothered. "Can I help you, Preston?" I asked, my voice flat and even. He did not answer. Instead, he reached inside his tailored jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and slammed it down onto the hood of the Mack truck. I glanced down. It was an invoice from the Grand Plaza Hotel, $35,000 for the wedding reception deposit. Stamped across the top in bold red letters were the words, "Payment declined." "What is the meaning of this?" Preston demanded, his voice echoing across the yard. "The venue called Maya this morning. They said the account on file rejected the wire transfer. Maya is at home crying her eyes out because the hotel is threatening to cancel our reservation by tomorrow if they do not receive the funds." I looked at the piece of paper, then looked back at Preston. I did not blink. "I guess the account is empty," I said calmly. "Empty?" Preston scoffed, throwing his hands in the air. "Are you out of your mind, old man? You committed to paying for this wedding. You made a promise to your daughter. And now you are making me look like a fool. My family has a reputation to uphold. We have important people attending this wedding, business partners, politicians. You are ruining my image." I leaned against the massive tire of the truck, crossing my arms over my chest. I watched him throw his little tantrum. "Your image," I repeated slowly. "Yes, my image," Preston snapped, taking a step closer. "Listen to me, old man. I do not care how you do it. Go to the bank and take out a loan. Max out whatever miserable credit cards you have left. Borrow from your trash-collecting buddies. Or better yet, sell that slum house of yours on the south side. I do not care. You need to fix this and pay your daughter's debt immediately." The audacity of this boy was almost comical. He was standing on my land demanding that I sell my home to finance a party he could not afford. My house on the south side was not a slum. It was a fully paid-off, beautifully restored brownstone that I bought for Maya's mother before she passed. It held all my memories, and this arrogant little boy wanted me to sell it so he could drink expensive champagne with his snobby friends. I let the silence stretch between us. I let him stand there in the dirt, breathing in the diesel fumes, waiting for me to crack. I looked him dead in the eye and delivered my answer. "I have no money, Preston," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am just a lowly garbage collector, remember? You and Maya made that very clear 2 days ago, so unfortunately, I cannot help you." Preston stared at me, his jaw clenching. His face turned a deep shade of crimson. "You are doing this on purpose," he growled. "You are trying to sabotage us because you are bitter and jealous of our success." I did not respond. I just kept looking at him. "Fine," Preston spat out, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "If you are going to be a stubborn, useless old man, then we do not need you. If you do not pay this bill by tomorrow morning, do not even think about stepping foot in our wedding. You are uninvited. You will not walk Maya down the aisle. You will not be in the photos. You will be completely cut out of our lives." He paused, breathing heavily, clearly expecting me to break down. He expected me to panic at the thought of losing my only daughter. He thought that threat was his ultimate weapon. I looked at him, gave a slight nod, and said 2 words. "I agree." Preston froze. The angry momentum completely drained out of him. He blinked, visibly confused. What he asked, his voice losing its arrogant edge. "I said I agree," I repeated calmly. "I will not attend the wedding. I will not walk her down the aisle. I will stay completely out of your lives. Now, if you will excuse me, I have actual work to do." I turned my back on him, picked up my rag, and started wiping the truck again. I did not give him another second of my attention. I could hear him stammering behind me, struggling to find the right words. He had come here to bully me into submission, and instead I had handed him exactly what he threatened me with. He had no leverage left. "Are you crazy?" Preston finally muttered, his voice full of disbelief. "You are going to regret this, old man." I kept wiping the chrome. I heard his footsteps retreating quickly across the gravel. I heard the car door slam shut. The silver BMW engine roared to life, and the tires spun in the dirt as he sped away, desperate to escape the yard and the reality of his situation. I watched the dust settle. I did not feel sad. I felt focused. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I had saved under a fake name. It rang only once before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah, boss," the voice said. It was Marcus, my private investigator. I had hired him the moment Maya told me she was engaged to a financial advisor. In my line of work, you learn to spot a hustler from a mile away, and Preston Vance smelled like a cheap hustle. "Did you get anything new?" I asked, watching the distant taillights of the BMW disappear down the street. "Oh, I got plenty." Marcus chuckled. "Let us start with this car. I just ran the plates on that silver BMW your son-in-law is driving around town. It is leased, and he is 4 months behind on the payments. The leasing company has already issued an order for repossession. They are actively looking for the vehicle right now." I smiled a slow, cold smile. A high society financial advisor who cannot even afford his car lease. Interesting. "What else?" I asked. Marcus sighed. "Boss, it gets worse. This guy is drowning. I am digging into his business now, and it is a massive mess. I will have the full financial report sent to your secure email by tonight. But let me tell you right now, you are going to want to sit down for this one." "Send it as soon as you have it," I said. And Marcus. "Yeah, boss. Keep an eye on my personal credit files. If Preston is as desperate as you say he is going to try to find money somewhere else." I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. I looked out over my massive sanitation yard, listening to the roar of my trucks rolling in and out. Preston and Maya thought they were punishing me by cutting me off. They thought they had the upper hand. They had no idea that they had just handed me the scissors to cut their strings. The game had just changed, and I was holding all the cards. I sat in the quiet solitude of my mahogany-lined study in my home on the south side. This room was my sanctuary. It smelled of old paper cedar and the faint trace of the lavender perfume my late wife used to wear. The walls were lined with books on business economics and environmental science, the very knowledge I used to build my empire from the ground up. I was sitting in my leather armchair staring at the muted television screen when the silence was broken by the sharp ringing of my cell phone. I looked down at the screen. The caller ID flashed my daughter's name, Maya. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up and pressed it to my ear. I did not say hello, I just listened. For the first few seconds, there was only the sound of shaky, theatrical breathing on the other end of the line. Then came the soft, trembling voice of a little girl who had broken a vase and wanted her father to fix it. Dad, Maya whimpered, her voice dripping with calculated sorrow. "Dad, please talk to me. I have been crying for 2 days. Preston is completely stressed out. He is pacing around the apartment and pulling his hair out. The hotel is threatening to cancel the entire reception by 5 o'clock today." You have to fix this. Please, Dad. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I knew this tactic well. It was the exact same tone she used when she was 16 and crashed her first car, the exact same tears she used when she overspent her college allowance. She wanted me to swoop in, open my wallet, and erase the consequences of her actions. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a quiet, unyielding calm. I told Preston everything he needed to know this morning, Maya. I have no money. I am just a garbage collector. I cannot afford a $35,000 deposit. The soft weeping on the other end of the line stopped instantly. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a cold, hard edge. Stop playing these stupid games with me, she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. Preston told me what you said to him at the dump. He told me you agreed to not come to the wedding. How could you be so petty? You are doing this just to punish me because my new family has standards. You are trying to sabotage the most important day of my life because you are jealous of Preston. Jealous of Preston? I repeated, feeling a bitter chuckle rumble deep in my chest. Yes, Maya shouted. You have always resented him because he is educated, because he is successful, because he operates in a world you do not understand. He is a financial genius, and you are just a stubborn old man who refuses to help his only daughter. Now listen to me very carefully. If you do not transfer that money to the venue right now, I am done with you. I will cut you out of my life completely. You will not be my father. You will not see your future grandchildren. You will be nothing to me. Do you hear me? She paused, breathing heavily, waiting for the threat to land. She thought the idea of losing her would break me. She thought she was holding the ultimate weapon. I let the silence stretch over the line for a long, heavy moment. I felt a deep ache in my soul, mourning the daughter I thought I had raised. But that ache quickly hardened into iron. Have a nice life, Maya, I said. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the end call button. I did not wait for her response. I tossed the phone onto my heavy oak desk. The room fell dead silent again. I had drawn the line and she had chosen to cross it. I opened my laptop. It was time to see exactly what kind of financial genius Preston Vance really was. Marcus, my private investigator, had sent the encrypted email 10 minutes ago. I clicked on the file and began to read the comprehensive financial dossier he had compiled. As my eyes scanned the glowing screen, a cold realization washed over me. Preston was not just an arrogant snob. He was a desperate, dangerous fraud. According to the records, Preston Vance was the sole owner of a boutique firm called Vance Capital Management. He presented himself as a wealth advisor for young, affluent professionals. He wore expensive suits, drove a leased European car, and flashed a fake smile to gain trust. But his firm had not made a single legitimate market investment in over 3 years. Instead, Preston was operating a textbook Ponzi scheme. The documents detailed a chaotic web of wire transfers. He was taking money from new clients and using it to pay off the fake returns of his older clients, pocketing a massive percentage to fund his lavish lifestyle. But the music was stopping. The report showed that his operating accounts were completely drained. He was overdrawn at 3 different banks. Several of his older clients had started demanding their principal investments back, and Preston had no cash to give them. I scrolled further down, reading the transcripts of phone records Marcus had legally obtained through a debt collection agency. Preston was dodging calls from aggressive creditors. He was sinking fast, and he was terrified. Then everything clicked into place. I suddenly understood the true purpose of this extravagant, over-the-top wedding. It was never about celebrating his love for Maya. It was a hunting ground. Maya had spent years networking with wealthy kids in college. Her bridesmaid list was full of young tech founders, doctors, and heirs to family fortunes. Preston had insisted on a massive 300-guest wedding at the most expensive venue in the city because he needed an audience. He planned to use the wedding, a wedding he expected the lowly garbage collector to pay for, as a glittering display of his own fake success. He was going to use the open bar and the caviar to charm Maya's wealthy friends, hand out his business cards, and lure them into his collapsing Ponzi scheme to keep himself out of prison. My daughter was not just a bride, she was the bait, and she was too blinded by her desperate desire for high society to see that her sophisticated fiancé was actually a common thief. I closed the report and leaned back in my leather chair. I poured myself a small glass of aged bourbon, staring at the framed photograph of my late wife on my desk. I wondered what she would say if she could see what our daughter had become. Would she tell me to rescue her? Or would she tell me to let the house burn down so Maya could learn how to rebuild from the ashes? Before I could take a sip of my drink, a sudden piercing alarm echoed through the study. It was not my regular cell phone. It was a dedicated, encrypted mobile device I kept in my desk drawer directly linked to my executive banking and identity protection service. This alarm only sounded for critical high-level security breaches. I pulled the device from the drawer and unlocked the screen. A bright red notification banner flashed across the display. High-risk alert. Credit inquiry and loan application initiated. I tapped the notification, my eyes narrowing as I read the details. Someone had just submitted an online application to a high-interest predatory lending company. They were attempting to secure an emergency cash loan for exactly $100,000. I looked at the applicant details. The name on the application was Leroy Jenkins. The date of birth was mine. The address was my Southside brownstone. And the social security number entered into the digital form was a perfect, flawless match to my own. My blood turned to ice. A standard identity thief might have my name or my address, but my social security number was guarded behind layers of corporate security. Preston Vance was a fraud, but he was not a master hacker. He did not have the skills to breach my encrypted files. There was absolutely no way he could have obtained that 9-digit number on his own. There was only one person in the entire world who knew my social security number by heart. Maya. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table with her when she was 18, helping her fill out her college financial aid forms. She had memorized my number back then, laughing about how easy it was to remember. The reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My own daughter. My flesh and blood. She was so desperate to save her fake high society wedding, so terrified of losing her fraudulent fiancé that she had handed over my most sensitive personal information. She had given Preston the keys to steal my identity and mortgage my name for $100,000. They thought I was just an ignorant trash collector who would not notice a credit check until it was too late. They thought they could commit federal identity theft, take the cash, pay the venue, and leave me to deal with the crippling debt. I stared at the red alert on the screen. The sorrow I felt earlier completely evaporated, leaving behind a cold, absolute silence in my mind. Maya had crossed the point of no return. She had chosen to participate in a crime against her own father. I set the bourbon glass down. I did not hit the button to block the loan application right away. I let my finger hover over the screen, a new, far more devastating plan forming in my mind. If they wanted to play a high-stakes game of financial fraud, I was going to let them think they had won. I was going to let them walk right into the trap they had set for me. I picked up my phone to call my security team. The lesson was no longer just about cutting off her allowance. It was about to become a masterclass in absolute destruction. During the glowing red alert that was still illuminating my dark mahogany desk, the private line began to ring. This was not my standard cell phone. It was a secure encrypted landline that I kept strictly for high-level corporate emergencies. Only 5 people in the entire world had that number. I reached out and picked up the heavy receiver. It was Thomas. Thomas had been my senior private wealth director at the bank for over 20 years. We had navigated market crashes, aggressive corporate buyouts, and multi-million-dollar real estate acquisitions together. He knew my voice, he knew my habits, and he knew how fiercely I protected my assets. When he spoke, his voice was tight with an anxiety I rarely heard from him. "Mr. Jenkins," Thomas said quickly, bypassing any standard pleasantries. "We just flagged a highly suspicious $100,000 loan application. It was routed through a third-party predatory lending platform online. They are attempting to use your primary social security number and your home address to leverage a rapid cash advance. My fraud team is putting a hard stop on the transaction right now and transferring the file to the authorities." I sat perfectly still in my leather chair. My eyes remained fixed on the framed photograph of my late wife. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the cold reality of the situation settle into my bones. My daughter had actually done it. She had handed her fraudulent fiancé the keys to my identity just to save face in front of a bunch of snobby socialites. "Hold on, Thomas," I said, my voice completely level and devoid of any panic. "Do not shut it down." There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint clicking of keyboards in the background of his office. Thomas finally cleared his throat, sounding genuinely confused. "Excuse me, sir. Did you understand what I just said? This is active identity theft. Someone is attempting to forge your signature electronically to secure a massive unsecured loan. If we do not block this immediately, the funds could be dispersed into an untraceable offshore account within 24 hours. I know exactly who it is," I told him, my tone hardening into something resembling granite. It is my future son-in-law, Preston Vance, with the full cooperation of my daughter, Maya. Thomas let out a low breath. He had known Maya since she was a little girl running around the bank lobby. The shock in his silence was palpable. If you shut it down now, I continued, my mind working 10 steps ahead, they will just get spooked. They will realize they hit a firewall and try another avenue. They will cover their tracks, use a burner device, claim it was a computer glitch, or deny it altogether. I do not want to just slap them on the wrist. I do not want to just stop them. I want to nail them to the wall. I leaned forward, resting my elbows heavily on the desk. Here is what we are going to do, Thomas. I want you to contact the fraud department and tell them to stand down temporarily. Let the application pass step 1. Let it move through the preliminary automated approval system. You want to let them think they succeeded? Thomas asked, his professional instincts kicking in as he realized the magnitude of my plan. Exactly, I replied. But while you let it process, I want your cybersecurity team to open a digital sandbox. Record the originating internet protocol address. Track the media access control address of whatever device they are using. Save every single keystroke, every metadata tag, and most importantly, capture the exact timestamp of their electronic signature. I want an ironclad digital footprint that no expensive defense attorney can ever dispute. Thomas breathed out slowly. He had seen me crush rival waste management firms who tried to undercut my contracts, but he had never seen me apply that same ruthless precision to my own flesh and blood. You are building a federal financial fraud case, he said quietly. I am building a graveyard, I replied coldly. Let them think they bypassed the security. Let them think they fooled the ignorant, uneducated old garbage collector. Send me the encrypted packet the absolute second they click the final submit button. Understood, Mr. Jenkins? Thomas said, his voice completely serious now. I will have the file to you within the hour. I hung up the phone. I did not feel sad anymore. The betrayal had burned out all my fatherly affection, leaving only the cold, sharp instincts of a man who built an empire from the dirt up. 45 minutes later, my computer pinged with a secure email from Thomas. I opened the file. It contained everything I asked for and more. The IP address matched Preston's luxury downtown apartment perfectly. The digital signature on the promissory note was a desperate amateur forgery of my own name. They had actually done it. They had committed a federal felony just to keep a wedding reception from being canceled. Suddenly, my personal cell phone buzzed on the desk. I picked it up. It was a text message from Maya. I opened the message and stared at the screen. It was a photograph of her and Preston sitting in a high-end rooftop bar. They were holding up crystal champagne flutes, smiling brightly for the camera. They looked triumphant, arrogant, and completely untouchable. Underneath the photo was a text message that dripped with pure venom and condescension. Preston just closed a massive investment project, the message read. The venue is paid in full and the wedding is back on track. Even without you, we are still living in high society. You can keep your trash money, Dad. We do not need you. I stared at the glowing words. She was actually gloating. She genuinely believed that her sophisticated fiancé had miraculously pulled a massive business deal out of thin air to save her big day. She had absolutely no idea that the expensive champagne she was drinking right now was bought with stolen funds. She did not realize that the man she was bragging about had just signed his own arrest warrant using her father's name. A slow, dark smile crept across my face. It was the kind of smile a predator gets when the prey walks willingly into the cage and locks the door behind itself. I did not type an angry response. I did not call her to scream. I simply typed a very brief, polite reply. I am so glad everything worked out for you. Enjoy the champagne. I hit send and tossed the cell phone aside. Then I picked up my secure corporate line again and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was Victor, the lead corporate litigator for Jenkins Environmental Solutions. Victor was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who destroyed multi-million-dollar corporations for a living. Victor answered on the first ring. Leroy, what do you need? Victor. I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth. I am sending you a digital packet right now. I need you to open it immediately. It contains undeniable, digitally verified proof of aggravated identity theft, federal wire fraud, and forged electronic signatures. I heard the sound of a file opening on his end. There was a brief silence as Victor scanned the documents. His sharp intake of breath told me he saw exactly what we were dealing with. This is a slam-dunk federal case, Leroy Victor said, his tone turning predatory. This is a minimum 10 to 15-year sentence. Who are we taking down? Preston Vance. I answered calmly. I want you to draft the federal subpoenas immediately. Contact our friends at the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Prepare the paperwork for a total asset freeze and a fast-track prosecution. Consider it done, Victor said. Do you want me to file the injunctions tomorrow morning? We can have federal agents knocking on his door before noon. No, I said softly, looking out my window at the sprawling Chicago skyline. Do not file the papers just yet. Let them get a little more comfortable. Let them print the fancy wedding programs. Let them send out the invitations to all their high society friends. I want Preston to feel like he won. I paused, letting the weight of my decision settle in. When the hammer falls, Victor, I want them standing in the middle of a crowd. I want them to lose everything when everyone is watching. Understood, boss, Victor replied. We will hold the fire until you give the signal. I hung up the phone and poured myself another small glass of bourbon. Maya wanted to pretend she was high society. She wanted to reject the man who hauled trash to build her a comfortable life. But she was about to learn a very painful truth about the real world. You can wear a silk dress and you can drink expensive champagne, but if you build your life on lies and theft, the garbage collector always comes to take out the trash. 3 days later, I found myself standing outside Le Petit Chateau, the most exclusive and overpriced French restaurant in downtown Chicago. It was the night of the official tasting dinner for the wedding. Maya had intentionally forgotten to invite me. She sent a group text to the bridal party and the Vance family, carefully leaving her father off the list. But I had my private investigator Marcus tracking Preston's every move. I knew exactly where they were, what time the reservation was, and what table they were sitting at. I did not wear my sanitation uniform this time. I wore a clean, simple, off-the-rack gray suit. It was the kind of suit a retired factory worker might wear to Sunday church. It was neat, but it did not scream money. I wanted them to feel entirely comfortable in their assumed superiority. I wanted them to look down on me. I gave my name to the host, a stiff man in a tuxedo who looked at my cheap suit with brief hesitation before leading me to the private dining room in the back. When I walked in, the atmosphere at the table froze. Maya dropped her fork, her eyes widening in absolute horror. Preston stiffened, sitting up straight in his chair. Patricia Vance, who was in the middle of a loud, boisterous laugh, cut her joy short and stared at me as if a stray dog had just wandered into the restaurant. Dad. Maya hissed, her face flushing red. What are you doing here? This is a private family tasting. I pulled out the empty chair at the end of the table and sat down, placing my worn cloth napkin on my lap. I am family, Maya, I said calmly, pouring myself a glass of sparkling water. I figured the father of the bride should know what his guests will be eating, unless I am interrupting something. Patricia let out a loud theatrical sigh and leaned back in her chair. Well, Leroy, since you are already sitting down, I suppose you can stay. But please let us keep the conversation appropriate. We were just discussing Preston's latest triumph. I looked at Preston. He was trying to maintain his smug composure, but I could see a faint bead of sweat forming on his forehead. He knew I knew he was broke, but he also thought he had outsmarted me with the fraudulent loan. He thought his secret was safe. Is that so? I asked, taking a sip of my water. What triumph is that, Preston? Patricia did not let him answer. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with absolute arrogance. My son just closed on a magnificent penthouse apartment in the Gold Coast district. She bragged, her voice echoing off the private room walls. It is a stunning multi-million-dollar property with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. It takes real financial genius to secure a property like that at his age. But of course, in our family, success is just in our blood. Maya smiled proudly, reaching over to squeeze Preston's hand. He is amazing, Dad. The apartment is breathtaking. We are moving in right after the honeymoon. It is exactly the kind of lifestyle we deserve. I kept my face perfectly still, projecting the image of a defeated poor old man who was intimidated by their wealth. A penthouse, I said softly. That sounds very expensive. Where exactly is this property, son? Preston puffed out his chest, regaining his arrogant swagger. He adjusted his silk tie and smiled at me condescendingly. It is the Pinnacle Tower on Lakeshore Drive, Leroy. I doubt you have ever collected trash in that neighborhood. The security is very tight. We are taking the top floor, Unit 4201. I nodded slowly, pretending to be impressed. Unit 4201. The Pinnacle Tower. That is quite an accomplishment. I reached into the inner pocket of my cheap suit jacket and pulled out my phone. I placed it under the table, resting it on my knee where no one could see the screen. I opened my encrypted corporate management app. Jenkins Environmental Solutions was my primary company, but I had diversified my wealth decades ago. I owned Jenkins Commercial Real Estate, a holding company that managed over 50 luxury properties across the city. I typed the address into my database. The search results popped up instantly. The Pinnacle Tower, Unit 4201, owner Jenkins Commercial Real Estate, LLC. I clicked on the tenant file. I did not need to read it, but I wanted to see the details with my own eyes. Preston Vance had not bought a multi-million-dollar penthouse. He was renting it. And according to my property manager's notes, Preston was 90 days past due on his rent. A formal eviction notice had been drafted and was scheduled to be served by the sheriff's department next week. I sat there looking across the table at this arrogant 32-year-old fraud. He was sitting in a luxury restaurant bragging to my daughter and his snobby mother about buying a piece of real estate that I literally owned. He was pretending to be a titan of industry, completely unaware that the lowly garbage collector he was mocking was his actual landlord and the man who was about to throw him out onto the street. The irony was so delicious I could almost taste it. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. "Well, Preston," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "I am sure you will get exactly what you deserve in that building." The dinner dragged on for another hour. They ordered the most expensive items on the menu: truffle risotto, dry-aged Wagyu beef, and 3 bottles of imported French wine that cost $800 each. Patricia complained about the service. Maya complained about the floral arrangements for the wedding. Preston kept checking his phone, pretending to be conducting high-level business deals. I sat quietly eating a simple garden salad, watching them play their pathetic game of pretend. Finally, the waiter arrived with the bill presented in a sleek black leather folder. He placed it in the center of the table. "Allow me," Preston said loudly, snatching the folder before anyone else could reach it. He glanced at the total. It was well over $3,000. He did not flinch. He pulled his wallet from his jacket and produced a heavy, shiny new platinum credit card. He dropped it onto the tray with a loud metallic clack. "A celebration of my new real estate acquisition," Preston announced, raising his empty wine glass. "To the future." Patricia clapped her hands together. "Oh, Preston, you are so generous. Maya, you are a very lucky girl to marry into such stability." I stared at the credit card sitting on the silver tray. I have exceptionally good eyesight. I recognized the distinct logo of the predatory lending bank Marcus had warned me about. This was the card linked to the $100,000 fraudulent account Preston had opened using my stolen social security number. He was paying for this extravagant dinner using my stolen identity right in front of my face. "Excuse me for a moment," I said quietly, pushing my chair back. "I need to use the restroom before we leave." No one looked at me as I walked away. They were too busy congratulating themselves, but I did not go to the restroom. I walked directly to the front of the restaurant, stepping behind the heavy velvet curtains where the maitre d' and the general manager stood at the main computer terminal. The manager looked up, surprised to see me behind the counter. "Sir, guests are not allowed back here." I pulled out my wallet and produced my Illinois driver's license, placing it firmly on the counter. Then I pulled out my phone, opening the secure banking application that displayed the active fraud alert for the exact credit card Preston had just handed to the waiter. "My name is Leroy Jenkins," I said, my voice low, authoritative, and absolutely commanding. "The man sitting at table 4 just handed your waiter a platinum credit card ending in 6609 to pay for a $3,000 bill." The manager looked at my ID, then at my phone screen. "Yes, sir," he said nervously. "The waiter is bringing the card to the terminal right now." "That account was opened fraudulently using my stolen identity," I said, tapping the screen to show him the official bank freeze order. "I am the legal owner of that credit profile. As the victim of this identity theft, I am instructing you right now to void that transaction. Run the card, let the machine decline it, and under no circumstances are you to allow that man to leave this restaurant without paying his bill." The manager swallowed hard, his eyes wide. He recognized the severity of the situation. He saw the federal fraud alerts glowing on my screen. "Yes, Mr. Jenkins, I will handle it immediately." I did not go back to the private dining room. I walked back toward the table just far enough to be seen. I pulled a crisp $50 bill from my pocket and handed it to the waiter who was walking past me. "This is for my salad and my water," I told the waiter. "The rest of the bill belongs to the high society folks at table 4. I turned my back on the private room and walked out the front doors of Le Petit Chateau. The cool night air hit my face and I took a deep, satisfying breath. I walked down the street toward my parked truck, knowing exactly what was about to happen inside. In about 30 seconds, the manager was going to walk up to that table, hand Preston a declined frozen credit card, and demand $3,000 in cash that the fake financial genius did not have. The fuse was lit. The explosion was coming. I did not walk out the front doors just yet. I stopped in the grand foyer, hiding in the shadows of a massive marble pillar near the coat check. I wanted to see it. I wanted to witness the exact moment the illusion shattered. I wanted to see the look on the face of the man who thought he could steal from me and get away with it. The general manager marched toward the private dining area. His face was stone cold. He carried the black leather billfold like it was a loaded weapon. The heavy velvet curtains separating the private room from the main dining hall had been pulled back by the waitstaff, leaving the Vance family completely exposed. The main room was filled with wealthy socialites, local politicians, and business elites. It was a crowd of people who knew each other, people who gossiped, people who judged. It was the exact crowd Patricia and Preston spent their entire lives trying to impress. The manager stopped at table 4. He placed the folder down on the pristine white tablecloth. Preston did not even look up at first. He was too busy swirling his expensive French wine and pretending to be a master of the universe. Then the manager spoke. His voice was perfectly professional, but he did not lower his volume. He spoke loud and clear, and his words carried across the silent room. "Sir, your payment has been rejected," the manager said. "The card you provided has been flagged for severe federal fraud and aggravated identity theft. The bank has permanently locked the account, and we have been instructed by the authorities to confiscate the physical card immediately." The reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Patricia dropped her crystal wine glass. It clattered against her porcelain plate, spilling dark red wine across the white tablecloth like a bleeding wound. Maya turned completely pale, her mouth falling open in silent horror. Preston turned a bright, violent shade of crimson. The arrogant smirk was wiped from his face so fast it was almost comical. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Keep your voice down," Preston hissed, looking around frantically at the neighboring tables. "This is a massive mistake. You are embarrassing me. Run the card again. Do you know who I am?" The manager did not flinch. He stood his ground with absolute authority. "I know exactly who the card belongs to, sir," the manager replied smoothly, "and it does not belong to you. The fraud division is already monitoring this transaction. We cannot run it again. You owe this establishment over $3,000, and I need an alternative form of payment right now." The surrounding VIP guests stopped eating. The clinking of expensive silverware faded into a heavy, suffocating silence. Dozens of eyes turned toward table 4. Wealthy patrons were openly staring. Women in designer dresses were whispering behind their hands. Men in tailored suits were shaking their heads in disgust. The humiliation was thick, heavy, and absolute. Preston began to panic. The sophisticated financial advisor was sweating through his expensive suit. He frantically dug into his pockets and pulled out a thick leather wallet. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped a business card onto the floor. He pulled out 3 other credit cards and threw them onto the silver tray. "Run these!" Preston demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. "Run all of them. Just take the money." The manager pulled a mobile payment terminal from his apron. He took the first card and inserted the chip. The machine hummed for 2 seconds before letting out a sharp, angry beep. Declined. Preston swallowed hard, a bead of cold sweat rolling down his temple. "Run the next one," he ordered. The manager inserted the second card. Another angry beep echoed through the quiet restaurant. Declined. Patricia shrank down in her seat. She covered her face with her hands, trying to hide from the burning stares of the high society crowd she worshipped. The wealthy mother who had just spent the entire evening bragging about her son's multi-million-dollar penthouse was now sitting at a table that could not even afford to pay for dinner. The manager inserted the final card. The machine beeped again. Declined. "I am sorry, sir," the manager said, though he did not look sorry at all. "All of your accounts are coming back as frozen or maxed out. If you cannot produce cash immediately, I will be forced to contact the police for theft of services." Maya looked around in pure panic. Her perfect high society dream was burning to the ground in front of an audience. Her eyes frantically searched the room until they found me. I was standing near the archway, my hands casually resting in the pockets of my cheap gray suit. Her arrogance was completely gone. She gave me a look of pure, desperate begging. She wanted the lowly garbage collector to step in and save her from total social ruin. I walked slowly toward the table. The whispers in the room died down. Everyone watched as the old man in the cheap suit approached the glamorous, humiliated family. I stopped right next to Preston, who was breathing heavily, staring at the declined cards like they were a death sentence. I reached into my pocket. I did not pull out my heavy metal black card. I pulled out a single, crisp $50 bill. I dropped it onto the white tablecloth right in front of Preston. "This covers my salad and my water," I said. My voice was steady, deep, and loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "I will let high society handle the rest of the bill." Maya let out a choked sob. Patricia closed her eyes in absolute defeat. Preston could not even look at me. I turned my back on them and walked out the front doors of the restaurant, leaving them completely trapped in their own mess. I walked down the cool Chicago street and climbed into the cabin of my truck. I started the roaring engine, but before I could pull away from the curb, my phone buzzed. It was Marcus, my private investigator. Boss Marcus said, his voice laced with grim satisfaction. "I have a live audio feed from the bug I planted on Preston's phone. You are going to want to hear this." "Patch it through," I said, leaning back in my seat. The audio crackled, and then I heard the sound of heavy, panicked breathing. Preston had managed to slip out the back door of the restaurant into a dark alleyway, leaving Maya and his mother inside as collateral while he desperately tried to find money. He was hyperventilating, pacing back and forth near the dumpsters. I heard the dial tone as he made a phone call. It was not to a bank. It was not to a wealthy friend. It was to a man named Rocco, a notorious underground lender who catered to desperate gamblers and failing businessmen. "Rocco, please," Preston begged as soon as the line connected. His voice was shrill, completely stripped of any dignity. "I need a wire transfer right now. Just $3,000. I am trapped at a restaurant and they are going to call the cops." A rough, cruel laugh echoed over the phone line. "You want $3,000 to pay for dinner?" Rocco mocked. "You already owe us $100,000, Preston. You said you had a mark. You said you were going to secure a massive loan today using your father-in-law's identity. The loan fell through." Preston sobbed, pacing frantically. "The account got flagged. The card is locked. I have nothing, Rocco. I have absolutely nothing. Please, if the cops come, they will look into my business. They will see everything. I will go to federal prison." There was a long, deadly silence on the other end of the line. Then Rocco's voice dropped to a terrifying growl. "I do not care about your dinner, Preston. And I do not care about the cops. You failed to deliver the money today. That means the grace period is over. The interest rate just doubled. If you do not have $150,000 in cash by the end of the week, we are not going to call the cops. We are going to start breaking bones. Do you understand me?" "Yes," Preston cried, completely broken. "Yes, I understand. I will get the money. I promise. Just please send me $3,000 right now so I can get out of here." "I will send you the $3,000, Rocco said coldly. "But it is going to cost you $10,000 tomorrow. Enjoy your dessert, rich boy." The line went dead. I listened to Preston slide down the brick wall of the alley, sobbing uncontrollably into his hands. The polished, sophisticated financial advisor was sitting next to a pile of garbage, crying like a terrified child. I reached out and turned off the audio feed. I put my truck in gear and pulled out into the street. The fake credit card had turned to ash and their precious high society image had burned down with it. But I knew Preston was a desperate man, and desperate men do desperate things. He was cornered, he owed dangerous people a lot of money, and he still thought I was a weak, vulnerable old man with a paid-off house. The trap had snapped shut, but the beast was still thrashing. I drove home into the night, ready for their next move. The silence in my living room was absolute. I sat alone in the dark, the faint amber glow of the streetlights bleeding through the blinds of my South Side brownstone. It was the house where I had built my life, the house where Maya took her first steps, the house where her mother drew her last breath. I was nursing a glass of bourbon, feeling the exhaustion of the night settling into my old bones when my secure phone vibrated on the coffee table. It was Marcus. I picked it up. "Speak," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Boss Marcus said, his tone grim and urgent. "You need to open your secure email right now. I just intercepted an audio feed. You are going to want to hear this, but I have to warn you, it is not pretty." "Where is the audio coming from?" I asked. "It is coming from the tracker in Maya's handbag," Marcus replied. 5 years ago, when Maya graduated from college, she threw a fit because all her wealthy friends were receiving luxury cars and European vacations. I did not give her a car. But I bought her an authentic, extremely rare Hermes handbag that cost more than most people make in a year. I knew the circles she was trying to run in. I knew the predators that operated in that high society world. So before I gave it to her, I had my corporate security team sew a military-grade micro-transmitter and GPS tracker deep into the inner lining. It was meant to protect her if she ever got into trouble. I never imagined the true danger would be the man she chose to marry, or that I would be listening to it to protect myself from my own daughter. I opened my laptop and clicked on the audio file Marcus had just sent. The recording started with the sound of a door slamming shut, followed by heavy, frantic footsteps pacing across a hardwood floor. It was Preston and Maya returning to his leased past due penthouse after the disaster at the French restaurant. Preston was hyperventilating. The suave, arrogant financial advisor was completely gone, replaced by a terrified animal backed into a corner. He knows Preston was shouting, his voice shrill and panicked. The old man knows about the credit card. He froze the account. He probably knows about the loan application, too. "Calm down, Preston," Maya snapped. Her voice was irritated, embarrassed, but entirely devoid of the panic her fiancé was feeling. "So, my dad canceled a card. Big deal. He is just a garbage man having a power trip. We will figure it out." "Figure it out!" Preston screamed, the sound of glass shattering echoing through the audio as he threw something against the wall. "You do not understand. Rocco gave me until the end of the week. If I do not hand over $150,000, he is going to send his guys to break my legs. Maybe worse. Your father was my only way out, and now the bank is completely locked down. I am dead, Maya. I am a dead man." There was a brief silence on the recording. I could hear Preston gasping for air. Then his pacing stopped. "Wait," Preston said, his voice dropping into a sinister, calculated whisper. "The credit card is gone. The loan is gone. But your father still has the house." Maya scoffed. "The house. That old brownstone on the south side. It is a dump, Preston. It is a fully paid-off historic property in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood," Preston corrected her quickly. "I checked the property records months ago just to see what kind of assets you stood to inherit. That house is worth at least $500,000 in cash right now." "So what?" Maya asked. "He is never going to sell it. He is obsessed with that place because of my mother. He does not have to agree to sell it," Preston said, his words coming out in a rush of desperate adrenaline. "Maya, listen to me. Your dad is 72 years old. He has been acting strange lately, right? Withholding money, showing up at fancy restaurants in dirty clothes, acting hostile." "What are you saying?" Maya asked. "I am saying he is losing his mind," Preston pressed on, his tone turning dark and manipulative. "We take him to a clinic. I know a doctor who owes me a favor, a guy whose license is already hanging by a thread. We pay him a few $1,000s and he writes an official medical evaluation stating that Leroy Jenkins is suffering from severe rapid onset dementia. We declare him legally incompetent." I sat frozen in my chair, the bourbon turning to ash in my mouth. I gripped the edge of my desk as Preston laid out his master plan. "Once the doctor signs the papers," Preston continued, "we force him into a state-run nursing home, for his own safety, of course. Then, as his only daughter, you apply for emergency power of attorney. You get complete legal control over his estate. We put the house on the market the very next day. I take my cut to pay off Rocco and save my life, and we use the rest to pay for the wedding and our honeymoon. By the time the old man even realizes what happened, he will be locked in a ward with no phone and no way to contact a lawyer." The silence that followed on the recording was the heaviest, most agonizing silence of my entire life. This was the moment. This was the crossroads. For my entire life, I had protected Maya. I had fed her, clothed her, and held her hand when she was afraid of the dark. I waited, holding my breath, waiting for my daughter to scream at him. I waited for her to slap him. I waited for her to tell him that he was a monster and that she would never ever allow anyone to harm her father. "Dad is stubborn," Maya finally said, her voice completely calm, completely detached. "He will fight the doctors. He will cause a scene." "Let him cause a scene," Preston urged. "The more he yells, the crazier he looks. The doctor will sedate him if he has to. It is the perfect plan, Maya. It solves everything. But I need you to agree. I need you to sign the petition." Another silence. I could hear the ticking of the clock in my study. I could feel my own heart beating against my ribs. "Will it be fast enough to pay the venue?" Maya asked. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a sharp, twisting agony that made me close my eyes. She did not care about my freedom. She did not care about my mind, my dignity, or my life. She only cared about the caterers, the flowers, and the country club. "If we move tomorrow," Preston promised eagerly. "Yes. The venue will give us an extension if I show them the medical power of attorney and the listing agreement for the house. We can save the wedding." A heavy sigh came through the speaker. Fine, Maya said, her voice cold and devoid of a single ounce of human empathy. Do it. Call your doctor. Once the wedding is over, he is no use to me anymore. The audio file ended. The playback stopped, leaving my study in absolute suffocating silence. I did not cry. The tears I had shed for my daughter over the past week had completely dried up. The sorrow that had been weighing down my heart vanished, leaving a massive hollow void. But that void did not stay empty for long. It was quickly filled with something else, something ancient, cold, and entirely merciless. The father in me died right there in that leather chair. The man who wanted to teach his daughter a lesson, the man who hoped she would eventually see the error of her ways, that man ceased to exist. Maya had made her choice. She had looked at the life of the man who gave her everything, and she had decided to trade it for a white dress and a cocktail party. I reached out and picked up my secure phone. I dialed Victor, my lead corporate litigator. He answered immediately. Leroy, Victor said. It is late. Is everything all right? Victor, I said, my voice sounding like grinding stones. The lesson is over. The gloves are off. I need you to prepare a full offensive legal strategy. They are going to try to lure me into a psychological evaluation tomorrow to declare me incompetent. Victor cursed softly under his breath. Do you want me to block it? We can send a cease and desist to every clinic in the city. No, I said, my eyes opening to stare into the darkness of the room. I do not want to block it. I want to walk right into their trap. But I want to be armed. Find out exactly which corrupt doctor Preston Vance is using. Buy his debts, uncover his secrets, and find every skeleton in his closet. By the time I sit in that examination chair tomorrow, I want to own that doctor's soul. Consider it done, Victor said, his tone matching my cold intensity. I hung up the phone. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the window, looking out at the city I had helped build. Maya and Preston wanted to play God with my life. They wanted to throw me into a cage and steal the keys. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot that the garbage collector knows exactly where all the trash is buried, and tomorrow I was going to bury them. The phone rang at 8 in the morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table drinking my coffee black, waiting for the trap to spring. The caller ID flashed my daughter's name. I picked it up and held it to my ear without saying a word. Dad, Maya said. Her voice was soft, dripping with a manufactured sweetness that made my stomach churn. I know things have been very tense between us lately, and I am sorry for that. But honestly, I am just worried about your health. You have been under so much stress, acting so out of character. I booked a general senior wellness checkup for you this afternoon with a specialist. Please just do this for me, just to give me peace of mind before the wedding. Her performance was flawless. If I had not listened to the secret recording of her planning to lock me in a psychiatric ward just hours prior, I would have believed she was a terrified, loving daughter. She was playing the part, perfectly setting the stage so she could later tell everyone she tried her best to help her poor delusional father. Send me the address, I said, keeping my voice sounding tired and defeated. I will be there at 2. I hung up the phone. A cold, determined energy settled into my bones. She thought she was leading a blind, helpless lamb to the slaughter. She had absolutely no idea she was dragging a lion into a cage she could not lock. The clinic was not located in a high-end medical district. It was tucked away in a decaying strip mall on the outskirts of the city, flanked by a discount liquor store and a vacant laundromat. Real, reputable doctors did not operate out of places with peeling linoleum floors and flickering fluorescent lights. This was exactly the kind of shadow clinic a desperate fraud like Preston Vance would use to buy a fake medical diagnosis. I parked my truck and walked into the waiting room. Maya was already there, sitting on a cheap vinyl chair. When she saw me, she stood up and wrapped her arms around me. The hug felt like a snake coiling around my neck. Thank you for coming, Dad, she whispered, squeezing me tight. This is for the best. You are going to get the help you need. I looked down at my daughter, feeling nothing but ice in my veins. You are right, Maya. Today is going to change everything. A receptionist with heavy makeup and a bored expression slid a glass window open. Leroy Jenkins, the doctor will see you now. Room 3. I will wait right here for you, Dad, Maya said, offering me a tight, encouraging smile. She practically shoved me toward the hallway. She was so eager to get her hands on my house she could not even hide the anticipation in her eyes. I walked down the narrow, dimly lit hallway and pushed open the door to room 3. Sitting behind a cluttered laminate desk was a man in his late 50s wearing a wrinkled white lab coat. He had thinning hair, nervous eyes, and a name tag that read Dr. Leonard Hayes. He did not look like a man who healed people. He looked like a man who sold secrets in dark alleys. "Have a seat, Mr. Jenkins," Dr. Hayes said, gesturing to a hard plastic chair across from him. His voice had a practiced, patronizing tone, the kind of voice people use when they speak to toddlers or the mentally incompetent. "Your daughter has expressed some very serious concerns about your recent behavior." I sat down, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I crossed my arms and looked at him in total silence. "Let us start with some simple cognitive tests." Dr. Hayes continued pulling a pen from his pocket. "Can you tell me what year it is? Can you tell me the name of the current president? Can you count backward from 100 by sevens?" I did not answer his ridiculous questions. I just stared at him, my face a mask of absolute calm. Dr. Hayes sighed heavily, shaking his head with a look of manufactured pity. "You see, Mr. Jenkins, this unresponsiveness is exactly what Maya described. Hostility, confusion, an inability to engage with reality." He opened a manila folder on his desk and pulled out a completely filled-out, officially stamped medical document. He slid it across the desk toward me. I glanced down at the paper. At the top, in bold letters, was the heading, Official Psychiatric Evaluation. Under the diagnosis section, someone had typed out rapid onset dementia, resulting in severe cognitive decline and hostile paranoia. Under the recommendation section, it read, immediate transfer to a supervised psychiatric care facility and immediate transfer of medical and financial power of attorney to the next of kin. I looked at the bottom of the page. It was already signed by Dr. Leonard Hayes. He had signed my life away before I even walked into the room. "I am sorry, Leroy," Dr. Hayes said, leaning back in his chair and folding his hands over his stomach. "But denial is a common symptom of your condition. For your own safety and the safety of your family, this is the only path forward. The order is signed. The transport vehicle will be here in 20 minutes to take you to the facility." He smiled a smug, victorious smile. He thought he held all the power. He thought he had just earned his dirty payday. I slowly reached into the inner pocket of my tailored suit jacket. I did not pull out a weapon. I pulled out a thick, heavy red folder that my lead corporate litigator, Victor, had couriered to my house at midnight. I tossed it onto the cheap laminate desk. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud that wiped the smile right off the doctor's face. "Let us talk about your condition, Leonard," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. Dr. Hayes frowned, looking at the red folder as if it were a bomb. "What is this?" "Open it," I commanded. He hesitated, his nervous eyes darting to my face. His trembling hands reached out and flipped the folder open. The first page was a highly classified legal dossier obtained by my private investigators. "I know you lost your medical license in the state of Nevada 4 years ago." I began reciting the facts from memory with ruthless precision. "I know you were indicted for accepting massive kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies and writing fraudulent prescriptions. I know you only avoided a 10-year sentence in federal prison by turning state evidence against your partners. And I know that right now you are operating in Illinois under a heavily restricted, deeply monitored probationary license. A license that requires absolute flawless compliance with the medical board." The color instantly drained from Dr. Hayes' face. His skin turned an ashen, sickly gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the document, seeing his entire criminal history laid out in stark black and white. I leaned forward, planting my hands flat on his desk, invading his space until he shrank back into his chair. "I also know that Preston Vance paid you $5,000 in cash yesterday afternoon to pre-sign that psychiatric hold." I continued, my voice sharp as broken glass. "I know you are desperate enough to risk federal prison again for a quick payday. But you made one fatal mistake, Leonard. You assumed Preston Vance was targeting a helpless old garbage collector." I tapped a thick, manicured finger against the red folder. "I am Leroy Jenkins. I own the building you are sitting in right now. I have a team of corporate lawyers who can have you dragged out of this room in handcuffs before you can even blink. You attempted to participate in a conspiracy to commit medical fraud, elder abuse, and extortion against me. That violates your federal probation. That means you do not just lose your license. You go straight to a federal penitentiary for the rest of your natural life." Dr. Hayes began to hyperventilate. Sweat poured down his forehead, stinging his eyes. He pushed his chair back against the wall, shaking uncontrollably. "Mr. Jenkins, I swear I did not know. Preston told me you were really sick. He told me he just needed to bypass the red tape. I needed the money. Please, you cannot ruin me. I am not going to ruin you, Leonard, I said softly. You are going to save yourself, but you are going to do exactly what I say. I reached across the desk, grabbed the fake dementia evaluation he had signed, and ripped it in half. I dropped the pieces onto the floor. I slid a blank sheet of clinic letterhead toward him and placed a pen on top of it. Pick up the pen, I ordered. He snatched the pen with shaking hands, his eyes wide with absolute terror. I will dictate. You will write, I told him. You will write a sworn, legally binding confession. You will state that Preston Vance approached you, offered you a cash bribe, and instructed you to falsify a medical document to forcibly commit me to an asylum so he could steal my assets. You will sign it, you will date it, and you will apply your official medical seal to the bottom. But if I write that it proves I took the bribe, Dr. Hayes stammered, tears forming in his eyes. Preston will use it against me. Preston Vance is currently under investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for wire fraud and identity theft, I informed him coldly. He is going down, Leonard. The only question is whether you want to go down with him or if you want to be the star witness for the prosecution. Write the letter. Now. Dr. Hayes did not argue anymore. He pressed the pen to the paper and began writing frantically, his handwriting messy but legible. He documented every detail of the bribe, every instruction Preston gave him, and the exact nature of the conspiracy. He signed his name at the bottom and stamped it with his official seal. He slid the paper across the desk to me, his head hanging in total defeat. I picked up the confession, folded it neatly, and placed it into the inner pocket of my jacket. I stood up, adjusting my cuffs. If you contact Preston or Maya to warn them about this, I will hand this confession to the medical board within 60 seconds, I promised him. You will smile, you will nod, and you will stay completely out of my way. I turned around and walked out of the examination room. I strolled down the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the cheap linoleum. When I pushed through the doors into the waiting room, Maya stood up quickly. She looked past me, expecting to see two burly orderlies coming to drag me away in a straitjacket. When she realized I was alone, looking perfectly calm and completely in control, confusion washed over her face. Dad, Maya asked nervously, "Where is the doctor? What did he say?" I looked at the daughter who had just tried to lock me in a cage for the rest of my life. I gave her a warm, bright smile. "The doctor said I am in perfect health." "Maya," I replied cheerfully. "He said my mind is sharper than a 30-year-old's. He said I have absolutely nothing to worry about. Are you ready to go home?" Maya stood frozen in the middle of the waiting room, her jaw clenched, her eyes darting frantically as her entire devious plan collapsed into dust right in front of her. She had absolutely no idea that I was not just walking out of that clinic a free man. I was walking out holding the very weapon that was going to destroy her life. 3 days before the wedding, the walls were finally closing in on Preston Vance and my daughter Maya. My private investigator Marcus had been sending me hourly updates. The situation had escalated from a minor financial panic to a full-blown catastrophe. The Grand Plaza Hotel had officially issued a final warning. If the $35,000 deposit was not paid in full by noon, the Grand Ballroom would be released to another client. The prestigious florist had already halted their production. The luxury caterer was threatening a breach of contract lawsuit. And hovering above all of that social embarrassment was Rocco, the underground lender who was undoubtedly sharpening his knives, waiting for Preston to deliver the cash he did not have. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping a hot cup of black coffee, listening to the ticking of the wall clock. I knew they were coming. They had exhausted every other option. The fraudulent credit cards were locked. The fake loan application was frozen. The attempt to throw me into a psychiatric ward and steal my house had failed spectacularly. I was their absolute last resort. At exactly 10 in the morning, the heavy oak front door of my Southside brownstone rattled with a frantic, desperate knock. I took my time getting up. I walked slowly down the hallway and pulled open the door. There they stood. The high society prince and the daughter who had just tried to lock me in a mental asylum 24 hours earlier. The physical transformation in both of them was astonishing. Preston looked like a dead man walking. His expensive designer suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat. He had dark, heavy bags under his bloodshot eyes, and his hands were trembling uncontrollably. Maya was an absolute mess of smeared makeup and red, puffy eyes. They had hit rock bottom, and the arrogance had been completely beaten out of them. "Dad." Maya choked out, her voice cracking as tears began to stream down her face. "Dad, please let us in." I stood in the doorway for a long moment, blocking their path, looking at them with a blank expression. "I thought you did not want a lowly garbage collector ruining your image," I said, my voice quiet and calm. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I belonged in a facility. Maya let out a loud sob and practically threw herself at me, wrapping her arms around my neck. I stood completely still, my arms at my sides, feeling absolutely nothing as she wept against my shoulder. "I am so sorry, Dad," she cried, her voice muffled against my shirt. "I was just stressed. The wedding planning made me crazy. I did not mean any of it. The doctor at the clinic made a mistake. Please, you have to forgive me. You are my father. I need you. It was a brilliant performance." If I did not know that she had spent the last 3 months plotting to strip me of every dime I owned, I might have believed those tears were real. But I knew the truth. She was not crying because she loved me. She was crying because the caterer was demanding cash. I slowly pulled her off me and stepped back, allowing them to enter the house. They scrambled into the living room like terrified refugees. Preston could not even stand still. He was pacing back and forth across my worn rug, wiping his sweating forehead with a trembling hand. "Leroy, please." Preston begged, his voice shrill and entirely stripped of his usual sophisticated tone. "I messed up. My liquid assets are temporarily tied up in an offshore audit. The hotel is going to cancel the wedding in 2 hours. We are going to be humiliated in front of everyone. I need a short-term bridge loan, just until my account's clear." I looked at the man who had forged my signature and tried to steal my identity. He was still lying. Even with a gun to his head, he could not stop lying. I walked over to my worn armchair and sat down heavily. I let out a long, ragged sigh. I slumped my shoulders forward and rubbed my eyes, playing the role of a tired, broken old man who was exhausted by the fighting. I let the silence drag on, letting their anxiety reach a boiling point. "I do not want to fight anymore," I said softly, staring down at my calloused hands. "I am old. I am tired. I just want my daughter to have a beautiful wedding day. I want peace in my family." Maya's eyes lit up with desperate hope. "Dad, do you mean it? Can you help us?" I slowly stood up and walked over to the old metal safe I kept tucked in the corner of the study. I spun the dial, pulled the heavy door open, and reached inside. I pulled out a crisp, certified cashier's check that I had prepared the day before. I walked back into the living room and placed the check face up on the coffee table. Preston and Maya rushed forward, their eyes widening in absolute disbelief. The check was made out to Preston Vance. The amount printed clearly on the official bank paper was $100,000. It was more than enough to pay the venue, the florist, the caterer, and everyone else. And more importantly to Preston, it was a massive chunk of the money he desperately owed to the underground mob. The relief that washed over his face was so intense he actually let out a breathless, hysterical laugh. "Oh my God," Maya gasped, covering her mouth. "Dad, I cannot believe this. Thank you. Thank you so much." Preston reached out eagerly with a shaking hand to snatch the check off the table. Before his fingers could touch the paper, I slammed my hand down over it, pinning it to the wood. Preston froze, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Not so fast," I said, keeping my voice sounding like a weary father. "I am giving you this money because I love my daughter. But the government watches large cash transfers closely. My union representative gave me a standard gift receipt form to fill out. It just proves to the Internal Revenue Service that this is a family gift and not taxable income. You both need to sign it before you touch this money." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper and a black ink pen. I smoothed the document out on the table right next to the $100,000 check. Preston and Maya did not even hesitate. They were completely blinded by the money. They were so desperate, so consumed by their own greed and survival, that they did not bother to read a single line of the document I had placed in front of them. Maya snatched the pen and scribbled her signature at the bottom. She handed the pen to Preston, who frantically scrawled his own name right next to hers. They pushed the paper back toward me, their eyes locked hungrily on the cashier's check. "There," Preston panted, wiping his sweaty brow. "It is signed. We are good. Thank you, Leroy. I promise you I will make this up to you." I picked up the signed document, folded it neatly, and slid it into my pocket. I lifted my hand off the check. Preston snatched it off the table like a starving dog grabbing a piece of raw meat. "Go," I said softly, turning my back to them. "Go pay for your wedding." They did not need to be told twice. They practically ran out of my house, the heavy front door slamming shut behind them. I stood in the quiet living room, listening to the tires of Preston's leased vehicle screech against the asphalt as they sped away. I reached into my pocket and pulled the folded paper back out. I could not help the cold, dark smile that slowly spread across my face. It was not a gift receipt. It was a legally binding, heavily fortified promissory note drafted by Victor, my lead corporate litigator. By signing that paper, Preston and Maya had legally acknowledged that the $100,000 was a high-interest personal loan. But that was not the trap. The trap was buried in the fine print. The document contained a strict acceleration clause and a confession of judgment. It stated that if the borrower had committed any prior acts of financial fraud against the lender, or if the funds were used for anything other than legitimate wedding expenses, the loan went into immediate, uncurable default. And upon default, the lender was granted the absolute legal right to instantly seize any and all assets belonging to the borrowers, without the need for a lengthy court trial. They thought they had just scammed a tired, foolish old garbage collector out of his life savings. They thought they had secured their high society future. They had no idea they had just signed a legal document that gave me the power to strip them of absolutely everything they owned. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee, and waited for the real show to begin. During the final fitting for her $15,000 wedding dress, my daughter looked at my stained work boots, pinched her nose, and whispered, "You are just a lowly garbage collector. Stand back and do not embarrass me in front of my new family." I did not argue. I did not yell. I just quietly put my unlimited heavy metal black card back into my pocket, handed the cashier a maxed-out secondary credit card, and walked out. When the decline receipt printed my daughter's perfect high society facade began to crumble, but that was only the beginning of the lesson I was about to teach them. My name is Leroy. I am 72 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know what city you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respect should never carry a price tag. I sat in my study watching the digital tracking feed Marcus had set up on my secure monitor. The little red dot representing Preston leased BMW was moving rapidly across the digital map of Chicago. It was supposed to be heading straight to the Grand Plaza Hotel to pay the $35,000 deposit. That was the desperate story they had sold me, but the red dot did not go to the hotel. It bypassed the downtown commercial district entirely and headed deep into an industrial park on the west side. I picked up the phone and called Marcus. "Where is he going?" I asked. Marcus let out a low whistle. "Boss, he just pulled into a scrap metal yard owned by the Moretti family. It is a known front for Rocco and his underground lending operation. Preston is not paying for a wedding today. He is paying for his kneecaps." I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. I had given them $100,000. It was a test, a final opportunity for Maya to do the right thing to pay her vendors and salvage her day. Instead, Preston had taken my money to save his own pathetic life, leaving his future wife standing at the altar with unpaid bills. The promissory note they signed stipulated that the funds were exclusively for wedding expenses. By handing that cash over to a mobster, Preston had just triggered the acceleration clause. He was in immediate default. The fallout did not take long. The very next morning, the house of cards finally collapsed. I was listening to the encrypted audio feed from the tracker hidden inside Maya's handbag. I could hear the frantic ringing of her cell phone. It was 8 in the morning, 48 hours before she was supposed to walk down the aisle. "Hello," Maya answered, her voice groggy. There was a pause, then her voice spiked with panic. "What do you mean you are releasing the ballroom? Preston brought the cashier's check yesterday. I saw him leave with it." I could hear the faint professional voice of the hotel manager on the other end. "No, ma'am. Mr. Vance never arrived. We have not received a single dollar. We are officially canceling your reservation and releasing the space." Maya dropped the phone. I heard her hyperventilating. Before she could even process the disaster, her phone rang again. It was the florist. 10 minutes later, the caterer called, then the luxury photographer. One by one, every single vendor pulled the plug. The checks had not arrived. The balances were zero. The wedding of the year was completely dead in the water. Preston Maya screamed. Her voice tore through the audio feed, raw and hysterical. "Preston, get out here right now." I heard heavy footsteps as Preston stumbled out of the bedroom. "What is going on?" he mumbled. "Where is the money?" Maya shrieked, the sound of things crashing to the floor echoing through the apartment. "The hotel just canceled. The florist is gone. Where is the $100,000 my father gave us?" There was a long, suffocating silence. Preston knew he was caught. He had nowhere left to hide. "I had to use it, Maya," Preston finally said, his voice dropping into a defensive growl. "I told you I was in trouble. Rocco was going to kill me. I had to pay him off. You stole my wedding money." Maya screamed, her voice cracking with absolute devastation. My father gave that to us to save the wedding, and you gave it to a mobster. You promised me you would pay the venue. You promised me." "Shut up," Preston roared. Then I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. It was the sharp, sickening sound of a physical strike, a loud slap echoing across the room. Maya let out a sharp cry of pain and stumbled backward, crashing into a piece of furniture. I stood up from my desk so fast my leather chair knocked backward into the wall, my hands balled into fists. Every protective instinct I had as a father screamed at me to drive over there and tear Preston Vance apart with my bare hands. I am a patient man, but hearing a man strike my daughter ignited a fire in my soul that almost consumed my logic. But I forced myself to stop. I forced myself to breathe. If I went over there now, I would end up in a jail cell and Preston would walk away playing the victim. I had to let the trap close completely. Through the audio feed, I could hear Maya sobbing softly on the floor. I waited for her to yell at him to leave. I waited for her to call the police. I waited for her to pack her bags and walk out the door. But she did not. Instead, I heard Patricia Vance Preston's mother entering the room. She had been staying in their guest room for the week. She did not ask if Maya was all right. She did not scold her son for laying his hands on a woman. She immediately went into damage control. "Get up off the floor," Patricia snapped coldly. "Crying is not going to fix this. My son did what he had to do to survive. Your father is the one who caused this mess." My father, Maya, wept, her voice trembling. "He gave us the money. Preston stole it. Your father set us up." Preston interrupted quickly, adopting his mother's twisted narrative. "He knew what he was doing. He is a bitter, vindictive old man who wants to see us fail. He gave us that money hoping it would tear us apart. He wants you to be miserable because he is miserable. He has millions of dollars." "Maya," Patricia added, her voice dripping with venomous greed. "He lives like a peasant, but he is sitting on a fortune. He watched you suffer. He let you humiliate yourself in that dress shop. He let our family face public disgrace at the restaurant. He is sick in the head. A rational father does not torture his own child. He is losing his mind. They were gaslighting her. They were twisting reality, turning the garbage collector who had just handed them a fortune into the villain of their story. We cannot let him get away with this." Preston said, his voice gaining confidence as he realized Maya was listening instead of fighting back. "He is not mentally fit to manage his own estate. Look at how he is acting, freezing accounts, making up crazy rules. He is unstable. Maya, if we do not take control of his assets right now, he is going to squander your entire inheritance just to spite us." "What are you saying?" Maya asked, her sobs slowing down. "I am saying we go to the courthouse today," Preston urged. "We file an emergency ex parte injunction. We tell the judge your father is having a severe manic episode and is destroying family wealth. As his only daughter, you demand immediate legal conservatorship. We take his accounts, we take the brownstone, we take everything. It is the only way to get the wedding back on track. It is your money anyway." I listened, standing perfectly still in my study. My own daughter had just been struck by a fraudster. Her wedding was ruined. Her future was tied to a criminal. And instead of waking up, she allowed her greed to blind her completely. "Okay," Maya whispered, her voice devoid of any moral compass. "Okay, let us do it. Call the lawyer. Let us take it all." I reached out and turned off the audio feed. The silence in the room was heavy, but my heart was completely steady. The last remaining tether between a father and his daughter had just been severed. She had chosen her path. She had chosen the very people who were destroying her, all because she worshipped the illusion of wealth more than she valued her own flesh and blood. 30 minutes later, my secure line rang. It was Victor, my corporate litigator. Leroy Victor said, his tone razor sharp. "We just got notified by the court clerk. Preston Vance and your daughter just walked into the county courthouse with a cheap attorney. They filed an emergency petition for an immediate conservatorship over your estate. They are claiming you are mentally incompetent and are requesting a judge to freeze your assets and grant Maya full power of attorney." I smiled. It was a cold, absolute smile. "Let them file it, Victor," I said, walking over to the window and looking out at the city. "And tell the court clerk we are not fighting the hearing. Tell them I will happily meet them at your law firm tomorrow morning to discuss the transfer of power." Victor chuckled darkly. "You are going to let them walk right into the boardroom." "I am going to let them think they have conquered the world," I replied. "Tell the front desk to prepare the executive suite. Preston Vance thinks he is bringing a knife to a street fight. He does not realize he just declared war on a ghost. Tomorrow we burn their high society dream to the ground." The morning of the meeting arrived with a cold, biting wind sweeping off Lake Michigan. I did not drive my garbage truck that day. I woke up early, showered, and walked to the back of my walk-in closet. I pushed aside the neon green and reflective orange sanitation jumpsuits that I wore to keep myself humble. Behind them, wrapped in protective garment bags, was the wardrobe of the man I truly was. I selected a custom-tailored charcoal gray Armani bespoke suit. I paired it with a crisp white Egyptian cotton shirt and a deep burgundy silk tie. I opened a small velvet box on my dresser and took out the gold Patek Philippe watch my late wife had given me on our 25th wedding anniversary. I slipped it onto my wrist. I looked in the mirror. The weary, broken garbage collector was gone. Standing in his place was the founder and chief executive officer of Jenkins Environmental Solutions. The predator was finally awake. I had my private driver pick me up in a black town car. We drove to the financial district, pulling up to the towering glass and steel skyscraper that housed Montgomery and Associates. It was the most powerful, ruthless corporate law firm in the state of Illinois. Victor, my lead litigator, was waiting for me in the lobby. We took the private executive elevator to the top floor, stepping into a massive glass-walled boardroom that offered a panoramic view of the entire city. At exactly 10 in the morning, the heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom swung open. Maya and Preston walked in. They had brought a lawyer with them. He was a short, nervous-looking man wearing a cheap, ill-fitting brown suit and carrying a scuffed leather briefcase. He looked like the kind of strip mall attorney who handled minor traffic tickets and desperate plea bargains. Preston had likely hired him for a few $100s, expecting to intimidate a poor, uneducated old man into signing away his life. Preston marched into the room with his chest puffed out, an arrogant smirk plastered across his face. Maya walked closely behind him, her eyes scanning the luxurious surroundings with clear confusion. They had expected to find me sitting in a cramped, dingy public defender's office. They did not understand why they had been directed to the top floor of the most expensive building in the city. Then their eyes landed on me. I was sitting at the head of the massive mahogany table. My posture was straight, my hands resting calmly on the polished wood. The sunlight caught the gold of my watch. I did not look like the man Maya had been ashamed of her entire life. I looked like absolute untouchable power. Maya stopped dead in her tracks. The blood drained entirely from her face. She stared at my tailored suit, her mouth opening and closing like a fish suffocating on dry land. "Dad," she whispered, her voice completely devoid of its usual condescension. "What are you wearing? What is this place?" Preston blinked rapidly, his arrogant smirk melting into a mask of deep uncertainty. He looked at me, then looked at Victor, who was standing beside me in a suit that cost more than Preston's leased car. The cheap lawyer cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. He slammed his scuffed briefcase onto the table and pulled out a stack of legal papers. "I am Arthur Penhaligon, representing Maya Jenkins and Preston Vance," the lawyer announced, his voice trembling slightly under Victor's cold gaze. "We are here to execute an emergency medical power of attorney and a voluntary transfer of assets. My clients have determined that Mr. Jenkins is no longer mentally competent to manage his estate. If you just sign these papers, Leroy, we can avoid a very ugly court battle." I did not say a word. I did not even look at the lawyer. I simply nodded to Victor. Victor stepped forward, placing his hands flat on the table. "Mr. Penhaligon," Victor said, his voice echoing through the silent room like a thunderclap. "I am Victor Montgomery, senior partner of this firm and lead corporate counsel for Jenkins Environmental Solutions and Jenkins Commercial Real Estate. You have just walked into my boardroom and attempted to extort my primary client, a man whose verified net worth is well over $200 million. The cheap lawyer physically stumbled backward. His eyes widened in absolute terror as he realized the catastrophic mistake he had just made. $200 million, he squeaked, his hands shaking so badly he dropped his pen. Maya grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling over. Her knees buckled. $200 million. She repeated the number as if it were a foreign language. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a horrifying realization. All those years she had treated me like dirt. All those times she had been embarrassed by my job. I had been sitting on a massive fortune the entire time, testing her character, waiting for her to prove she was worthy of it. And she had failed spectacularly. Preston turned a sickening shade of gray, his sophisticated facade completely shattered. "This is a trick," Preston stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He is a garbage man. He drives a trash truck. He owns the trash trucks." Preston Victor corrected him with a vicious smile. "He owns the landfills. He owns the recycling centers. And as you recently discovered, he owns the Pinnacle Tower, where you are currently 3 months behind on your rent." Victor did not give them a second to breathe. He picked up a thick black folder and tossed it across the long table. It slid to a stop right in front of Preston. "Open it," I commanded. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Preston reached out with trembling hands and flipped the folder open. Inside that folder, Victor began pacing slowly around the table. Is the digitally verified IP address, the media access control metadata, and the exact timestamps of the fraudulent $100,000 loan application you submitted using Mr. Jenkins' stolen Social Security number. That is a federal wire fraud felony carrying a minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Preston gasped, clutching his chest as if he had just been shot. Victor tossed a second folder onto the table. It landed directly in front of Maya. In that folder, Victor continued relentlessly, is a comprehensive financial audit of Vance Capital Management. It proves that your brilliant fiancé has not made a single legitimate investment in 3 years. He is running a Ponzi scheme. He is currently overdrawn at 3 banks, and he owes exactly $150,000 to a known organized crime syndicate. Maya looked down at the documents, her tears spilling over her cheeks. She looked at Preston with pure, unfiltered disgust. "You lied to me," she sobbed. "You have absolutely nothing. You are one to talk about lies." "Maya," I said, finally breaking my silence. I picked up a small remote control from the table and pressed a button. The state-of-the-art surround sound speakers hidden in the boardroom ceiling crackled to life. Suddenly, the room was filled with the crystal-clear audio recording from the hidden microphone inside Maya's expensive handbag. Preston's voice echoed from the speakers, frantic and manic. "We force him into a state-run nursing home," the recorded Preston urged. "For his own safety, of course. Then, as his only daughter, you apply for emergency power of attorney. We put the house on the market the very next day." Then came Maya's voice, cold and heartless. "Fine. Do it. Call your doctor. Once the wedding is over, he is no use to me anymore." The recording stopped. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like it was crushing the air out of the room. Maya buried her face in her hands, weeping uncontrollably. She could not look at me. The cheap lawyer was already packing his briefcase, moving silently toward the door, desperate to escape the massive criminal conspiracy he had just walked into. Preston fell to his knees right there in the middle of the boardroom. He pressed his forehead against the plush carpet, sobbing like a terrified child. "Please, Leroy." Preston begged, his voice completely broken. "Please do not call the FBI. I will do anything. I will leave the state. I will leave Maya. Just please do not send me to prison. Rocco will kill me if I go to jail." I looked down at the pathetic, cowardly man who had dared to strike my daughter and tried to steal my life. I had the power to end him right there. I had the federal agents on speed dial. The trap was fully sprung. But I wanted more. I did not want him to just go to jail quietly. I wanted the elite society they worshipped to watch them burn. "Stand up, Preston," I ordered. Preston slowly got to his feet, his face stained with tears and mucus. He looked at me with pathetic, desperate hope. "I am not sending you to prison today," I said, my voice as cold as absolute zero. Maya looked up, her eyes wide. "Dad, you are going to let him go." "I am not letting anyone go," I corrected her. "I am simply delaying the execution. You wanted a high society wedding, Maya. You sacrificed your own father to secure a venue and impress a bunch of wealthy snobs. So you are going to have your wedding." Preston blinked, totally confused. "What?" I looked at the two of them, my expression completely unreadable. "You are going to go ahead with the ceremony tomorrow," I instructed them. "You are going to put on your expensive suit, Preston. Maya, you are going to wear the dress you degraded me for. You are going to walk down that aisle and you are going to smile for the cameras. I want you to perform for your elite guests. Let us see exactly how long your high society act lasts before the curtain falls." "But," the vendors, Maya stammered, "they all canceled. We have no venue, we have nothing." Victor smiled, a sharp, terrifying smile. "Mr. Jenkins has generously secured a new venue for you," Victor informed them. "He also paid a premium to reinstate the caterer and the florist. The wedding will proceed exactly as planned tomorrow morning." Preston swallowed hard. He knew this was not a gift. He knew this was a march to the gallows, but he was too terrified to say no. "Get out of my boardroom," I commanded. "Both of you. Go rehearse your vows. You are going to need them." They did not say another word. They turned and fled the room like terrified ghosts, leaving me sitting in the silence of my power. Tomorrow was not going to be a wedding. Tomorrow was going to be a funeral for their arrogance. I sat in the dark of my study, the faint glow of the city streetlights casting long, distorted shadows across the hardwood floor. Victor, my lead corporate attorney, had followed my instructions flawlessly. I had promised Maya and Preston a new venue for their wedding, but I never promised them luxury. The Grand Plaza Hotel was a playground for the elite, a place of crystal chandeliers and imported marble. The place Victor secured for them was a decaying community banquet hall on the far west side of the city. It had peeling laminate floors, flickering fluorescent lights, folding metal chairs, and a distinct smell of stale beer and old floor wax. It was a place where people held cheap bingo nights, not high society weddings. It was exactly the kind of place Maya had spent her entire life running away from. And now it was going to be the stage for her grand performance. I turned on the encrypted audio receiver linked to the tracker hidden deep inside Maya's expensive handbag. It was the night before the wedding. They had gone to the new venue for the final walkthrough and setup. I could hear the hollow, empty echo of their footsteps in the cavernous hall. Then I heard Patricia Vance. The polite, sophisticated mask she had worn at the French restaurant had completely dissolved. She was shrieking, her voice vibrating with pure, unfiltered rage. "This is an absolute joke," Patricia screamed, her voice bouncing off the cheap wood-paneled walls. "This place is a slum. It smells like a public restroom. I am not bringing my friends to a dump like this. I have state senators and bank executives on my guest list, Preston. Do you expect me to serve them cheap wine in plastic cups sitting on folding metal chairs?" "Mom, please, just calm down," Preston pleaded. His voice trembled with the sheer exhaustion of a man who knew he was completely cornered. "It is just for one day. We have to do this. Leroy paid for it. We have no other choice. Rocco is breathing down my neck. If we cancel the wedding, people will start asking questions about my finances. We just need to get through tomorrow." Patricia let out a laugh that sounded like scraping metal. She ignored her son's desperate situation and turned her venom entirely onto Maya. "This is your fault, you stupid girl," she spat, her tone dripping with classist disgust. "I always knew you were nothing but low-class trash. You parade around in designer clothes trying to act like you belong in our world, but look at you. Look at where you come from. Your father is a garbage man, and now you are dragging my son down into the gutter with you. You are nothing but a pathetic gold digger who cannot even afford her own wedding." I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles turning white. I waited for Maya to fight back. I waited for her to scream at Patricia to tell her that her precious son was a broke fraud who was facing federal prison. I waited for her to defend herself, to show even a single ounce of the pride and strength I had tried to instill in her since she was a little girl. But Maya did nothing. She swallowed her pride. She swallowed the abuse. "I am sorry." Patricia Maya whimpered, her voice tiny and broken, sounding like a beaten dog. "We will make it look nice. I promise. We will buy extra flowers to cover the water stains on the walls. We will dim the lights. Just please do not leave. Please do not make Preston cancel the wedding." She was completely broken. She was so desperate to marry a man who hit her, so desperate to hold on to the hollow illusion of being a wealthy socialite, that she was willing to let an arrogant, racist woman treat her like dirt. She had dug her own grave, and now she was willingly lying down in it. I turned off the audio feed. I felt a deep, absolute emptiness in my chest. I had spent my entire life working in the filth, breathing in exhaust fumes, and hauling trash, trying to build an empire so my daughter would never have to bow her head to anyone. I wanted her to be a queen who owned her own destiny. Instead, she had willingly made herself a peasant in a kingdom of liars. My cell phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. The screen lit up the dark room with a text message from Maya. I picked it up and read the words glowing against the glass. "Dad, please. The venue is horrible. Preston's mother is furious and calling me names. My friends are going to laugh at me when they see this place. If you have any humanity left in you, please come tomorrow morning. Bring your checkbook. Hire a better caterer at the last minute. Rent some luxury cars to park out front. Do something to save my face. Be a father to me just this once." I read the message twice. "Be a father to me just this once." The absolute sheer audacity of her words was staggering. She was still trying to manipulate me. She was still trying to use my love as a weapon to extract money and status. She did not care about the betrayal. She did not care that I knew about her plan to lock me in a psychiatric ward and steal my house. She only cared about saving her face in front of people who secretly despised her. I did not reply. I deleted the message and placed the phone face down on the desk. The final string tying my heart to her was gone. She was no longer my little girl. She was just another corrupt adult who needed to learn a very harsh, unforgiving lesson about the real world. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my encrypted corporate phone. I bypassed my usual business contacts and scrolled down to a number I had saved specifically for this exact moment. It was a direct line to Special Agent Harrison at the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Chicago. Victor had already briefed him on the massive mountain of evidence we had compiled against Preston Vance. They had the digital footprints, the forged loan application, the illegal wire transfers, and the sworn signed confession from the corrupt doctor at the clinic. All they needed was the green light to execute the federal arrest warrant. I pressed the call button. The line rang twice before a deep professional voice answered the phone. "Agent Harrison," the voice said. "This is Leroy Jenkins," I replied, my tone flat, hard, and strictly business. Mr. Jenkins Harrison said, his tone instantly shifting into high alert. "Your legal team sent over the dossier this afternoon. It is completely airtight. We have a federal judge standing by who just signed the final arrest warrant for Preston Vance. We were just waiting for your signal on when and where to make the move. We know he is a major flight risk given his heavy debts to organized crime." "He is not going to run tonight," I assured him. "He thinks he has to put on a show tomorrow to keep his scam alive and appease his investors." "I am giving you the green light, Agent Harrison. Where will he be?" the federal agent asked. I gave him the address of the cheap community banquet hall on the west side. I gave him the exact layout of the building that Victor had rented for them, including the back exits and the loading docks. "The wedding ceremony begins at exactly 10:00 tomorrow morning," I said, my voice as cold as the winter wind blowing off the lake outside my window. "Mr. Vance will be standing right at the altar waiting for his bride. I want you to walk through those doors and take him down in front of every single high society guest he invited. I want his elite friends and his arrogant mother to see exactly what kind of man he really is. We will have a full tactical team stationed outside the perimeter by 9:30 in the morning," Agent Harrison confirmed. "We will secure all the exits. We will wait for your signal to enter the building. You do not need a signal from me," I told him. "Just walk in and do your job. The groom will be ready for you. Be my guest." I hung up the phone. The wheels of justice were officially in motion. There was no stopping it now. The trap I had carefully laid over the past week was about to snap shut with enough force to shatter their fake lives forever. I walked out of my quiet study and headed upstairs to my bedroom. I opened my large walk-in closet and looked at the custom-tailored Armani suit I had worn to the boardroom earlier that day. I reached right past it. I grabbed the neon green and reflective orange sanitation jumpsuit that I wore on my Tuesday routes. It still had faint grease stains on the knees and smelled faintly of diesel fuel. I laid it out carefully on the foot of my bed, smoothing out the wrinkles with my heavy hands. Maya wanted to hide the garbage collector from her fancy friends. She wanted to erase where she came from. Tomorrow I was going to remind her. I was going to walk right into the middle of that wedding wearing the exact same clothes she was so ashamed of, and I was going to watch her world burn to the ground. During the final fitting for her $15,000 wedding dress, my daughter looked at my stained work boots, pinched her nose, and whispered, "You are just a lowly garbage collector. Stand back and do not embarrass me in front of my new family." I did not argue. I did not yell. I just quietly put my unlimited heavy metal black card back into my pocket, handed the cashier a maxed-out secondary credit card, and walked out. When the decline receipt printed my daughter's perfect high society facade began to crumble. But that was only the beginning of the lesson I was about to teach them. My name is Leroy. I am 72 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know what city you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respect should never carry a price tag. The community banquet hall on the west side of Chicago was a masterpiece of urban decay. I sat in the back of my black town car across the street watching the luxury vehicles pull into the cracked, pothole-ridden parking lot. Mercedes Bentleys and Range Rovers navigated around discarded fast food cups and shattered glass. The high society guests stepped out of their expensive cars, the women in designer gowns, and the men in tailored tuxedos. They looked around in absolute bewilderment. Some checked their gold-embossed wedding invitations, convinced they had entered the wrong address into their navigation systems. But they had not. This was the venue Victor had secured. This was the stage for the final act of Maya and Preston's grand lie. Inside the hall was a suffocating box of cheap wood paneling and flickering fluorescent lights. I had a live audio feed from the microphone inside Maya's handbag, but my private investigator Marcus had also managed to slip inside posing as a catering assistant. He was sending me live updates through an earpiece. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. The guests were sitting on cold metal folding chairs that squeaked loudly with every movement. There were no crystal chandeliers, only water-stained ceiling tiles. The floral arrangements that Victor had ordered at the last minute were cheap, wilted grocery store bouquets stuffed into plastic vases. The smell of stale beer and industrial bleach hung heavy in the air. The elite socialites were whispering behind their hands, throwing disgusted glances around the room. This was not the society event of the season. It was a spectacular social disaster. At the front of the room, standing on a slightly elevated wooden platform that served as an altar, was Preston Vance. Marcus described him perfectly. He looked like a man standing on the gallows waiting for the floor to drop. He was sweating profusely. Large, dark, wet circles had formed under the arms of his tailored navy suit. He kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. He was not looking down the aisle waiting for his beautiful bride. He was darting his eyes toward the exits, terrified that Rocco's thugs were going to walk through the doors and break his legs right there on the altar. He was a trapped rat, and he knew it. Sitting in the front row was Patricia Vance. Even in the middle of a decaying community center, she was trying to maintain her arrogant facade. She sat with her spine completely rigid, wearing a ridiculously expensive emerald green dress, her neck draped in pearls. She was using a paper program to fan her face, ignoring the sympathetic and mocking stares of her wealthy friends sitting behind her. Marcus heard her whispering to a bank executive's wife, claiming that Maya had insisted on this venue to support a local charity initiative. It was a pathetic, transparent lie. Everyone in that room knew they were sitting in a cheap hall because the money had run dry. The Vance family reputation was actively bleeding out onto the dirty laminate floor. Then the music started. There was no live string quartet. There was no grand piano. It was a scratchy, distorted recording playing through blown-out speakers mounted in the corners of the room. The guests stood up the metal chairs, clattering loudly. Maya walked through the side doors. She was wearing her $15,000 Vera Wang gown, the dress she had humiliated me over just a week ago. But the heavy, pristine white silk dragged across the sticky, unwashed floor, collecting dirt with every step. She was walking alone. She had begged me to come save her face, but I was not there. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her makeup had been applied heavily to hide her exhaustion, but she just looked hollow. She did not look like a triumphant high society bride. She looked like a prisoner walking to her cell. She reached the altar and stood next to Preston. They did not smile at each other. They did not hold hands with the warmth of a couple in love. They stood stiffly, staring straight ahead as the minister began to speak. I opened the door of my town car and stepped out onto the pavement. I had laid out my sanitation uniform the night before, fully intending to wear it. But when I woke up, I realized that showing up as a garbage collector would only give Patricia Vance and her snobby friends a reason to dismiss me. It would allow them to write off the entire disaster as the fault of a low-class father. I could not allow that. If I was going to crush a man who worshipped status and power, I had to show him that I possessed more status and power than he could ever comprehend. I was wearing my custom charcoal gray Armani bespoke suit. My shoes were polished Italian leather. The gold Patek Philippe watch rested heavily on my wrist. I did not look like a man who hauled trash. I looked exactly like what I was. The founder and chairman of a $200 million corporate empire. Standing on the sidewalk waiting for me were two men in dark conservative suits. Their posture was rigid, their eyes scanning the surroundings with professional intensity. Gold federal badges were clipped securely to their belts. Special Agent Harrison stepped forward and gave me a curt nod. "We are ready when you are, Mr. Jenkins," Agent Harrison said, his voice low and serious. "We have the perimeter secured. No one leaves until we have our man." "Let us go," I replied. We walked across the cracked parking lot and approached the heavy double doors at the main entrance of the hall. I did not knock. I did not wait for an invitation. I placed both hands on the metal push bars and shoved the doors open with a violent, echoing crash. The heavy wooden doors slammed against the interior walls. The bright morning sunlight flooded into the dim, dreary room, casting long shadows down the center aisle. The scratchy wedding music cut off abruptly. The minister stopped speaking mid-sentence. Every single head in the room snapped around to look at the entrance. 130 high society guests gasped in collective shock. I stood in the doorway, framed by the light. To my left and right stood two heavily armed federal agents. I looked down the long, dirty aisle, my eyes locking directly onto Preston Vance. The color instantly drained from Preston's face. His jaw dropped open. He staggered backward, knocking over a cheap floral arrangement. It shattered on the floor, but no one looked at it. All eyes were on me. Patricia Vance stood up from the front row, her pearls clicking against her chest. She looked at my tailored suit, my watch, and my absolute commanding presence. She looked completely bewildered. This was not the poor, ignorant man she had insulted at the French restaurant. The man standing at the back of the room radiated a kind of wealthy, terrifying authority she had never encountered before. Maya let out a choked gasp. "Dad," she whispered. Her voice carried through the silent hall. I did not smile. I did not look angry. I looked completely ruthlessly indifferent. I began to walk down the center aisle. My leather shoes clicked sharply against the laminate floor, the sound echoing like a ticking clock counting down the final seconds of their fake lives. Agent Harrison and his partner walked slowly behind me, their hands resting near their tactical belts. The wealthy guests shrank back into their metal chairs as I passed by. They could sense the danger. They could see the federal badges. The room was paralyzed by a sudden, suffocating tension. I reached the front of the room and stopped right at the edge of the wooden platform. I looked at Patricia, who was trembling, clutching her silk purse. I looked at Maya, whose $15,000 dress was stained with dirt at the hem. And finally, I looked at Preston. He was practically hyperventilating. Sweat poured down his face, ruining his perfectly styled hair. He looked past me, his terrified eyes fixing on the federal agent standing at the end of the aisle. He knew exactly what was happening. His Ponzi scheme, his forged loan, his attempt to steal my identity and lock me in a psychiatric ward. All his sins had finally caught up to him. Leroy Preston stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "Leroy, what are you doing? We can talk about this." I adjusted my cuffs, slowly taking my time. I looked him dead in the eye, stripping away the last remaining shred of his false dignity in front of everyone he had ever tried to impress. "We are done talking, Preston," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the dead silent room. "I just came to take out the trash." The echo of my words hung in the stale air of the banquet hall. I just came to take out the trash. No one moved. No one breathed. The wealthy guests, sitting on their cheap metal chairs, were paralyzed. They had come to witness a high society union, and instead they were sitting in the front row of a federal takedown. The minister, a frail man holding a small black book, looked completely terrified. He glanced at Preston, then at the federal agents flanking me, and then down at his shoes. The silence was so heavy it felt like the walls were closing in. Preston swallowed hard. He tried to force a smile, a pathetic, trembling grimace that made him look completely deranged. "Leroy, please," Preston whispered, his voice cracking. "You are making a scene. Let us just finish the ceremony, and I swear to you we can step into the back room and sort out whatever misunderstanding this is." Maya looked at me, her face pale, her eyes pleading. But she did not ask me to stop. She was finally realizing that the man standing next to her was not a savior. He was an anchor tied to her ankles, dragging her down into the abyss. I did not answer him. I just stared at him with eyes as cold and unforgiving as a Chicago winter. The minister, desperate to break the suffocating tension, foolishly decided to continue. He cleared his throat, his hands shaking violently. "Dearly beloved," he stammered, his voice echoing weakly through the blown-out speakers. "We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." He was rushing through the words, skipping entire sections of the script, just wanting to get to the end so he could escape the room. Preston turned his attention back to Maya, desperate to complete the legal binding before the handcuffs came out. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He opened the box, revealing a massive, glittering diamond ring. He looked at Maya, his eyes wide with a frantic, manic urgency. "Just say yes, Maya," he whispered sharply. "Just get through the vows." The minister rushed to the final traditional question. "If anyone here can show just cause why these two should not be lawfully joined, speak now or forever hold your peace." The words had barely left his lips before I stepped forward. My leather shoes clicked against the laminate floor. "I object," I said. My voice was not a shout. It was a deep, resonant boom that vibrated through the floorboards. It was the voice of a man who commanded an empire, a man who had tolerated enough disrespect for one lifetime. The entire hall gasped. The wealthy socialites leaned forward in their squeaky metal chairs, their eyes wide with morbid fascination. "I object," I repeated, walking slowly down the aisle until I stood right at the edge of the wooden platform. "Because the groom does not even have the money to pay for the ring he is currently holding in his sweaty hands." Preston froze. The velvet box in his hand trembled. "That is a lie," he sputtered, his voice high and defensive. "This is a custom-cut diamond. I paid for it in cash." "You have not paid for anything in cash in 3 years, Preston," I replied smoothly, looking him dead in the eye. "That ring was financed through a high-interest jeweler under a shell corporation that went bankrupt 2 months ago. You are standing up here trying to marry my daughter, trying to act like a titan of finance, but the suit you are wearing is past due. The car you drove here in is slated for repossession, and you owe a very dangerous man $150,000 by the end of this week." The crowd erupted into loud, frantic whispers. The illusion was completely shattered. The high society guests, the people Preston had invited specifically to lure into his Ponzi scheme, were now looking at him with absolute disgust. They were sharks, and there was blood in the water. Patricia Vance jumped up from the front row. Her face was purple with rage. "How dare you!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at my face. "You are a dirty, lying old man. My son is a highly respected financial advisor. He is a millionaire. You are just a jealous garbage collector trying to ruin his life." I did not even look at her. I kept my eyes locked on Preston, watching the absolute terror completely consume his soul. "I am not ruining his life, Patricia," I said calmly. "He did that all by himself." I stepped aside, clearing the path for the men standing behind me. Special Agent Harrison walked forward, his posture rigid, his face completely devoid of any emotion. He stepped onto the wooden platform. Preston backed away, his hands raised in surrender, the velvet ring box falling to the dirty floor. The diamond rolled out and settled into a crack in the cheap laminate wood. Preston Vance, Agent Harrison, announced, his voice echoing with absolute federal authority. "You are under arrest for aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and federal conspiracy to commit financial fraud." The agent grabbed Preston's arm, spun him around roughly, and slammed him face first against the cheap wooden archway they had set up for the ceremony. The sound of cold steel ratcheting tight echoed through the silent hall as the heavy metal handcuffs clamped securely around Preston's wrists. The hall descended into absolute chaos. Women screamed. Men stood up, pulling out their phones to record the spectacle. Maya collapsed to her knees on the platform, the heavy silk of her Vera Wang dress pooling around her in the dirt. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched the sophisticated man she had chosen over her own father get treated like a common street criminal. "No," Preston screamed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched wail as the federal agents patted him down. "No, please, there is a mistake. Leroy, tell them it is a mistake. I will sign whatever you want. I will leave Maya alone. Just do not let them take me. I cannot go to federal prison. Rocco will find me in there. They will kill me." I looked down at him. The man who had slapped my daughter, the man who had tried to steal my identity, the man who had plotted to lock me in a psychiatric ward was now begging me for his life. "You should have thought about that before you tried to forge my name." "Preston," I said coldly, "enjoy the accommodations. I hear they do not serve expensive French wine in federal lockup." Patricia Vance lost whatever was left of her mind. She rushed the altar, her expensive pearls swinging wildly around her neck. She grabbed Agent Harrison's arm, trying to pull him away from her son. "Let him go," she shrieked hysterically. "Do you know who we are? We have connections. I will have your badge for this. I will sue this entire city. I am calling our lawyers right now. We will destroy you." Agent Harrison did not even flinch. He simply looked at another agent who stepped forward and firmly restrained Patricia, pulling her away from the arrest. "Ma'am, if you interfere with a federal investigation, you will be leaving in handcuffs as well," the second agent warned her sternly. Patricia stopped fighting, but she continued to scream, directing all her venom at me. "You did this, you worthless piece of trash!" She spat, her face contorted with pure hatred. "You set him up. You ruined my family. You will pay for this. My lawyers will take every last dime you have." I stood perfectly still, letting her rage wash over me without feeling a single ounce of intimidation. She was a loud, desperate woman who had just realized her entire identity was built on a crumbling foundation of lies. I waited until she ran out of breath. I waited until the room fell relatively quiet again, the only sounds being Maya's quiet sobbing and Preston's pathetic whimpering as the agents hauled him toward the side door. I am not done yet, Patricia, I said softly. My voice cut through the remaining noise in the room, sharp and deadly. I looked over my shoulder and gave a single subtle nod toward the back of the hall. Victor, my lead corporate litigator, stepped out from the shadows. He was carrying a sleek leather briefcase. He walked down the aisle with the calm, predatory confidence of a man who was about to deliver a fatal blow. The arrests were for the government. What came next was for me. The real lesson had just begun. Victor walked down the center aisle of the decaying banquet hall. The sharp, authoritative click of his polished shoes against the laminate floor was the only sound in the room. The federal agents had just dragged Preston Vance out the side door, his desperate screams fading into the distance. The high society guests were frozen in their metal folding chairs, completely paralyzed by the spectacle they had just witnessed. They thought the show was over. They thought the worst had already happened. They were wrong. Victor reached the front of the room and stood beside me. He did not look at Maya, who was still kneeling on the floor in her ruined $15,000 wedding dress. He did not look at the terrified minister. He opened his sleek leather briefcase, pulled out a single thick document bearing an official government seal, and handed it directly to me. I took the document. I held it in my hand and turned my attention back to Patricia Vance. Patricia was breathing heavily. Her chest heaved as she aggressively smoothed the front of her emerald green designer gown. She was desperately trying to glue the shattered pieces of her elite facade back together. She looked at her wealthy friends in the front row, offering them a shaky, artificial smile, trying to communicate that this was all just a temporary misunderstanding. Then she turned her venomous eyes back to me. "You think you have won?" Patricia hissed, her voice vibrating with a toxic mix of panic and deep-seated prejudice. "You think you can just march in here with your cheap tricks and destroy my family? My son is a Vance. We come from a lineage of wealth and power. We have lawyers on retainer who will tear you apart. You are nothing but a common street thug who got lucky with a garbage company." I did not interrupt her. I let her speak. I wanted everyone in that room to hear exactly how arrogant she was. "Preston will be out on bail by tonight," she continued, raising her chin defiantly, trying to look down her nose at me. "We have properties. We have assets. We have the multi-million-dollar penthouse at the Pinnacle Tower. We will liquidate whatever we need to crush you in court. You will go back to the filthy landfill where you belong, and we will return to the Gold Coast. You cannot touch our real wealth." I looked at the woman standing before me. She was so blinded by her own elitism, so convinced of her inherent superiority that she could not comprehend the reality of the situation. She genuinely believed that her white upper-class status was an impenetrable armor against a black man she perceived as beneath her. "Patricia," I said, my voice completely calm, dropping into a low, resonant register that commanded absolute silence in the room. "Are you currently staying at your son's residence in the Gold Coast district?" Patricia crossed her arms defensively. "Yes, I am. And it is a magnificent property. Floor-to-ceiling windows, imported marble, private elevator access. It is the kind of luxury a man like you could never even dream of stepping foot inside. I will be going back there tonight to coordinate our legal defense team." I slowly unfolded the heavy legal document Victor had handed me. I held it up so the overhead fluorescent lights caught the official red seal of the county sheriff's department. "You are not going back there tonight," I told her. Patricia frowned, her arrogant expression faltering for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" I looked down at the document and began to read aloud, making sure my voice carried to the very back row of the silent banquet hall. "Official notice of immediate eviction and asset seizure. Issued to Preston Vance, occupant of Unit 4201 at the Pinnacle Tower. Due to 90 days of delinquent rent and breach of lease agreement, the occupant and all associated guests are hereby ordered to vacate the premises immediately." Patricia let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Rent? My son does not rent. He owns that penthouse. He showed me the deed himself." "You are holding a fake document. You are completely delusional." "He showed you a forged document, Patricia," I corrected her smoothly. "Just like the forged loan application he submitted yesterday. Preston does not own a single square foot of that building. He has not paid a dime in rent in 3 months. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. She instinctively took a step back, her confidence finally beginning to crack under the weight of my absolute certainty. "And do you want to know the best part, Patricia?" I asked softly. She stared at me, her eyes wide, her breathing becoming shallow. She did not answer. I leaned in just slightly, ensuring my next words would be etched into her memory for the rest of her miserable life. Mrs. Vance, the penthouse your son is living in belongs to Jenkins Real Estate. I am the sole owner of that building. Your son is my delinquent tenant." The blood vanished from Patricia's face. Her skin turned an ashen, sickly gray. Her jaw went slack. "Your family has exactly 24 hours to clear out of my property," I continued, delivering the final fatal blow without a single ounce of mercy. "Because if you are not gone by tomorrow morning, I am going to send my garbage trucks to haul all of your designer clothes, your expensive jewelry, and your precious elite status straight to the city dump." The cognitive dissonance hit her like a physical shockwave. Her brain simply could not process the information. The wealthy, aristocratic socialite had just realized that her entire existence, her safe haven, her ultimate symbol of status, was owned outright by the black sanitation worker she had spent months treating like absolute dirt. The man she refused to breathe the same air as was her landlord. The man she called a lowly garbage collector held the deed to her entire fake reality. Patricia gasped for air. She brought her hands up to her throat, clutching her expensive pearl necklace so hard the string snapped. Dozens of white pearls cascaded down the front of her dress, bouncing and scattering across the dirty laminate floor with a sound like falling hail. "No." Patricia wheezed, her eyes rolling wildly around the room, looking for someone, anyone, to tell her this was a nightmare. "This cannot be true. You are lying. You are just a garbage man. I am the garbage man." I agreed, stepping back and straightening my tailored suit. "And I am officially throwing you out." Patricia's knees buckled. The sheer weight of the humiliation, the absolute destruction of her classist arrogance, and the realization that her son was going to federal prison while she was about to be homeless was too much for her fragile reality to bear. She let out a faint, strangled cry, her eyes rolling back into her head. She collapsed forward, her body hitting the cheap floor of the community hall with a heavy, ungraceful thud. She lay completely motionless among her scattered pearls. The banquet hall erupted. The wealthy guests sitting behind her gasped and jumped out of their seats. But nobody rushed forward to help her. Nobody knelt down to check her pulse. The elite society friends she had spent her life trying to impress were now actively backing away from her unconscious body. They looked at her with pure, unfiltered disgust. She was no longer one of them. She was the mother of a federal criminal, a woman who had just been brutally and publicly evicted by a billionaire she had foolishly insulted. The social infection was too strong. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with her. I stood there looking down at the unconscious woman on the floor. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I had spent my entire life dealing with people like Patricia Vance, people who believed their skin color and their zip code gave them the right to walk all over hard-working people. Today I had finally shown them the true cost of their arrogance. Victor stepped up beside me, looking down at Patricia with a cold, professional indifference. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Send the sheriff's deputies to the Pinnacle Tower right now." Victor ordered the person on the line. "I want the locks changed on Unit 4201 within the hour. Do not let anyone inside without my direct authorization." I looked past Patricia's unconscious body and focused my attention on the woman still kneeling on the wooden altar. Maya had stopped crying. She was staring at me, her eyes wide, completely paralyzed by the absolute destruction I had just unleashed upon the family she had chosen over me. She had wanted to play the high society game. She had wanted to rub shoulders with the elite and pretend she was better than the man who raised her. Now the groom was in federal custody, the mother-in-law was unconscious on a dirty floor, and the guests were fleeing the building like it was on fire. The payoff was complete. The false kingdom had been crushed into dust. But there was still one piece of trash left to deal with. I slowly turned my gaze to my daughter, ready to deliver the final consequence of her betrayal. During the final fitting for her $15,000 wedding dress, my daughter looked at my stained work boots, pinched her nose, and whispered, "You are just a lowly garbage collector. Stand back and do not embarrass me in front of my new family." I did not argue. I did not yell. I just quietly put my unlimited heavy metal black card back into my pocket, handed the cashier a maxed-out secondary credit card, and walked out. When the decline receipt printed my daughter's perfect high society facade began to crumble. But that was only the beginning of the lesson I was about to teach them. My name is Leroy. I am 72 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know what city you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that respect should never carry a price tag. The heavy wooden doors of the banquet hall slammed shut behind the federal agents. Preston Vance was gone. The man who had promised my daughter a life of elite privilege was now sitting in the back of a government vehicle on his way to a federal holding cell. The flashing red and blue lights of the cruisers outside bled through the cheap frosted windows of the hall, casting an eerie rhythmic glow over the absolute disaster he had left behind. The high society guests did not stay to offer their sympathies. The moment the federal agents cleared the doorway, a mass exodus began. The wealthy socialites, the bank executives, the politicians, they all scrambled for the exits like rats fleeing a sinking ship. They tripped over the squeaky metal folding chairs and shoved past each other in a desperate bid to distance themselves from the radioactive scandal of the Vance family. Nobody looked back. Nobody offered a hand to Patricia Vance, who was just beginning to stir on the dirty laminate floor, groaning amidst her scattered pearls. The elite world Maya had sacrificed her soul to join was evaporating before her very eyes, leaving nothing but the stench of stale beer and broken promises. I stood perfectly still at the front of the room. Victor stood silently behind me, a silent guardian of my newfound authority. I turned my attention to the wooden platform. Maya was kneeling in the center of the makeshift altar. Her $15,000 Vera Wang wedding dress, the dress she had humiliated me over, was completely ruined. The delicate white silk was stained with dirt and smeared with the crushed petals of the cheap grocery store flowers Preston had knocked over. Her expensive bridal makeup had melted into dark, jagged streaks down her cheeks. She looked absolutely hollow. She watched her wealthy friends run out the door, abandoning her without a second glance. The realization was finally setting in. The illusion was dead. The money was gone. The fake Prince Charming was a federal criminal. She slowly turned her head and looked at me. For the first time in her life, she was not looking at a lowly garbage collector. She was looking at the man who owned the trucks, the man who owned the real estate, the man who held the power to either save her or destroy her. She tried to stand up, but her legs gave out. Instead, she crawled forward to the edge of the platform. She slid off the wooden step and collapsed onto the floor right at my feet. She reached out with trembling, desperate hands and wrapped her arms around my legs. She buried her face against the fabric of my tailored Armani trousers, sobbing with a heavy, agonizing despair. "Dad," she wept, her voice choking on her own tears. "Dad, please. I am so sorry. I am so sorry for everything. I was blind. I was so stupid. I did not know what he was really doing. He lied to me. He manipulated me. You have to save me, Dad. Please, you are my father. You have to save me." I looked down at the top of her head. I felt the wetness of her tears seeping through the fabric of my suit. There was a time not too long ago when seeing my daughter cry would have torn my heart to shreds. There was a time when I would have moved heaven and earth, drained my bank accounts, and fought any battle just to see her smile. But that man died the moment I heard her on that hidden audio recording. That man died the moment she agreed to lock me in a psychiatric ward so she could steal my house and pay for a cocktail party. I did not reach down to stroke her hair. I did not offer her a comforting hand. I stood there as rigid and unyielding as a marble statue. "You were not blind, Maya," I said, my voice low, steady, and completely devoid of warmth. "You saw exactly who Preston was. You saw how he treated people. You saw how he treated me. But you did not care because he offered you the one thing you loved more than your own father. He offered you status." She shook her head wildly, still clinging to my legs, her fingers digging desperately into my suit pants. "No, Dad. Please do not say that. I love you. I was just stressed. He poisoned my mind. He made me think you were trying to hurt us. I never wanted to put you in a home. I swear I did not mean it." I let out a slow, heavy breath. The lies were still spilling out of her mouth even now, even when all the cards were on the table. She was not crying because she regretted betraying me. She was crying because her golden ticket had just been revoked and she was terrified of the consequences. "You rejected me because I smelled like trash," I said, looking down at her tear-stained face. "You looked at my calloused hands and my dirty boots and you felt ashamed. You wanted to hide me from the world because you thought I was beneath you. But you did not know that trash is what creates money. The dirt, the sweat, the long hours in the cold, that is what built the fortune you were so desperate to inherit." Maya sobbed louder, squeezing her eyes shut as the truth hit her like a physical blow. I leaned forward just slightly, ensuring my voice was the only thing she could hear over the sound of her own crying. "But the real tragedy, Maya, is that you never learn the difference between working with trash and actually being trash. Because the real trash in this room is not the garbage collector. The real trash is the woman who plotted to destroy her own father for a wedding dress and the fraudulent husband she chose to do it with. Dad, please, she begged, her voice scraping the bottom of her throat. I have nothing left. Preston took everything. The credit cards are maxed out. I do not even have a place to live. You cannot just leave me here. I am not leaving you with nothing. I corrected her, my tone dropping into a sharp, lethal register. I am leaving you with exactly what you earned. Maya stopped crying for a fraction of a second. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a sudden, terrifying realization. What do you mean? I looked at Victor. He stepped forward and pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. It was the promissory note. The same note Maya and Preston had eagerly signed 3 days ago in my living room, completely ignoring the fine print in their greedy rush to grab the $100,000 check. That $100,000 promissory note you and Preston signed last week is now officially in default, I told her calmly. You violated the terms the second Preston handed that money to an underground mobster instead of the venue. The acceleration clause is now fully in effect. Maya stared at the paper in Victor's hand, her breathing becoming shallow and erratic. She finally understood the magnitude of the trap she had walked into. That means I legally own your debts now, I continued, showing absolutely no mercy. And I am exercising my right to immediate asset seizure. That luxury SUV you have been driving around town to impress your friends will be repossessed by my bank representatives tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Your personal bank accounts have already been frozen to cover the remaining balance of the loan. You wanted to live in the high society world, Maya. Welcome to the real cost of doing business. No, Maya screamed, her voice tearing through the empty hall. No, you cannot do this to me. I am your daughter. You are supposed to protect me. I protected you your entire life, I replied, my voice echoing with a final absolute authority. And it turned you into a monster. Now it is time for the world to teach you the lessons you refuse to learn from me. I took a step back. I physically pulled my leg out of her desperate grip. Her hands slipped off my trousers and hit the dirty laminate floor. She scrambled forward, trying to grab me again, but Victor stepped neatly between us, blocking her path. We are done here, I said. I turned my back on the woman who used to be my little girl. I did not look at Patricia Vance, who was sitting up now, clutching her broken pearls and weeping silently in the front row. I did not look at the shattered floral arrangements or the overturned metal chairs. I fixed my eyes on the heavy double doors at the front of the room. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps steady and measured. I could hear Maya screaming my name behind me. She was begging, pleading, apologizing over and over again, her voice cracking with the absolute agony of a woman who had just lost everything she ever cared about. The sound of her despair echoed off the walls, a haunting melody of complete and total ruin. But I did not stop. I did not turn around. I pushed the heavy doors open and walked out into the bright Chicago sunlight. The cold wind hit my face, and for the first time in 28 years, I felt completely, undeniably free. 1 month has passed since the morning I walked into that decaying banquet hall and shattered a false reality. A crisp, cool breeze sweeps off Lake Michigan this morning as I sit high up in the cabin of my 12-ton garbage truck. The deep, heavy rumble of the diesel engine vibrates through my boots. I am wearing my neon green and reflective orange sanitation jumpsuit. I still drive my Tuesday route. Some habits keep a man grounded. Some routines remind a man exactly who he is and where he came from. I turn the massive steering wheel, guiding the truck through a busy commercial district on the edge of the city. I slow down as I approach a red traffic light outside a modest, crowded diner. Through the large plate glass window, I see a waitress furiously wiping down a sticky table. She is wearing a cheap polyester uniform, a stained apron tied around her waist, and her hair is pulled back into a messy, exhausted ponytail. It is Maya. There are no Vera Wang silk gowns anymore. There are no crystal champagne flutes or high society friends laughing at her jokes. There is only the harsh, unforgiving reality of minimum wage and customer complaints. My daughter used to look at service workers as if they were an entirely different species, invisible people meant only to serve her needs. Now she is one of them. She is working double shifts just to pay off the massive financial hole she dug for herself when she signed that promissory note. She pauses her cleaning and looks up through the diner window. Her eyes lock onto the massive garbage truck idling at the light, and then they lock onto me sitting in the driver's seat. I do not wave, I do not scowl, I do not feel anger or sadness. I just look at her with absolute peaceful indifference. The light turns green. I step on the gas pedal, the engine roars, and I drive away, leaving her standing there with her dirty rag and her mountain of debt. Preston is faring much worse. Victor, my lead corporate attorney, called me yesterday with the final update on his case. Preston took a blind plea deal to avoid a lengthy and embarrassing federal trial, hoping for leniency. The federal judge did not show any. Preston was sentenced to 8 years in a medium-security federal penitentiary for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. He traded his custom-tailored Navy suits for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. There are no luxury penthouses or offshore accounts where he is going. He is finally paying the ultimate price for his arrogance. His mother, Patricia, is completely out of the picture. After I evicted her from my property in the Gold Coast district, her elite friends abandoned her entirely. The social stigma of a federal criminal's son was a stain they refused to be associated with. She is currently renting a tiny one-bedroom apartment far outside the city limits, completely isolated from the wealthy world she worshipped. I pull my truck into the main gates of Jenkins Environmental Solutions. I park it in its designated spot, turn off the engine, and climb down the metal steps. I walk into my main office and sit down at my large oak desk. Sitting right in the center of the desk is a confirmation receipt from the bank. The $150,000 I had originally set aside in a trust for Maya's wedding is completely gone. I transferred every single penny of it yesterday afternoon. I did not keep it, and I certainly did not invest it in another property. I donated the entire fund to a community center on the south side of Chicago. It is an organization dedicated to providing trade skills, financial literacy, and mentorship programs for underprivileged Black youth. I am using that money to build futures for young men and women who actually know the value of a dollar. Kids who will never be ashamed of having dirt on their hands or sweat on their brows. I stand up and walk over to the small coffee maker in the corner of my office. I pour myself a hot cup of black coffee. I walk over to the large window and look out over the massive 5-acre sanitation yard. My trucks are rolling out, my crews are working hard, and the sun is shining brightly over the city I helped build. I take a slow sip of the hot coffee. For the first time in 28 years, my shoulders feel completely light. There is no more pretending. There is no more ungrateful daughter draining my peace of mind. There is no more heavy burden of unconditional love being met with conditional respect. I am just a man who built an empire from the trash up, and I have finally taken out the garbage in my own life. I am absolutely, undeniably free. Respect is a mirror, not a price tag. When you judge someone by the dirt on their clothes or the calluses on their hands, you expose the poverty of your own soul. Money can buy luxury, but it cannot buy loyalty, dignity, or class. Family is not a free pass for exploitation, and kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. A title or a fancy suit means nothing if the character wearing it is bankrupt. True wealth is built in silence, and the most devastating downfall comes to those who forget where they came from. Did you like this story? What would you have done in my place? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about life, truth, and justice. See you in the next one.